Chapter 899. People should look forward to the future, but they couldn't always focus on money. Fong had never been an educated man, so it was normal that he couldn't keep up with the times. Therefore, it was necessary to help him establish a correct outlook on life and values. For example, money could never be used up. When the time was right, he should give back to the society by helping the people perform for free, so that they could enjoy a 5D movie experience. Although he would lose money, he would be giving back to the society, which would help him realize his self-worth. Looking at his confused face, Chen Fan knew that he didn't understand. But this was not a big deal. The current old Fong's state of mind was much higher than before. He did good deeds without leaving his name, risked his life, and used his private money to support a single girl for 3 years without asking for anything in return. Even in this era where people's hearts were not so fickle, it was still very rare. This world doesn't give the poor a chance to live. Earth, you don't know what's good for you. Heaven, you don't know what's good for you. I don't want to shed even half a star of blood in the mortal world. If I have a stomach full of resentment, I will feel the 6 ice flowers rolling like a brocade, so that my body won't be exposed. From now on, the Chuzhou city will suffer from 3 years of drought. Inside the brothel, someone would stand up and shout from time to time. This was a typical example of someone who was too engrossed in the scene and placed himself in it. There was no need for the staff of the brothel to remind them at all. Someone beside them would press them down so that they wouldn't spoil everyone's interest. In another brothel, in a remote corner, the man handed a handkerchief to the middle-aged man next to him and sighed. "Lord 5, wipe your tears." The middle-aged man wiped his tears and heaved a sigh. "Well done. It's a good performance." The burly man nodded. If he didn't know that this was a play, he would have rushed up and punched that dog official to death with 3 punches when blood was splashed on the white rope and snow was flying in the 6th month of June. The middle-aged man stared at the stage and murmured, "Doi's grievances could be redressed, but I wonder how many more people's grievances are still buried in the darkness." The burly man shook his head and said, "The imperial court is already vigorously investigating the unjust and false cases. Those filthy and ugly fellows hiding in the dark will one day be dragged out and exposed to the sun." The middle-aged man nodded. "Yes, the sun is about to rise. How could it be? How could she sue the Ministry of Justice?" Cui Qingming's face was filled with rage. The teacup in his hand fell to the ground and the tea splashed everywhere. He gasped for breath and loudly said, "Last time, we have already lost an assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice. Now, the assistant minister of the Ministry of Justice, Luigi, is only following that person's orders. That woman is still in prison. How could such a thing happen? She caused trouble twice a few days ago and has already attracted the attention of some people. Without a reason, we can't keep her in prison forever." Tsing Shichen shook his head and said, "I thought she would be more obedient after being locked up for so long. Who would have thought that as soon as she went out, the people following her were not paying attention and made her kneel in front of the Ministry of Justice?" Cui Qingming returned to his seat and calmed down for a while. Then, he said in a deep voice, "I will take care of this case. Otherwise, if it really gets investigated, not to mention Chu Ping, even you, the capital governor, will not be able to protect yourself." As soon as he finished speaking, a runner came in to report that the Ministry of Justice had arrived. Cui Qingming suddenly stood up from his seat, his face full of shock. How could it be so fast? The case of Miss Shuang of the wonderful Sound Pavilion quickly had new developments. The case file of the capital governor's office that had accepted the case was full of loopholes and could not withstand scrutiny. The coroner who had examined the corpse also revealed the truth under the interrogation of the Ministry of Justice. That night, Miss Shuang was not killed by the criminal. Instead, she was tortured and humiliated to death. As for why the murderer was said to be the criminal who might not have appeared, they would have to ask the young master of the Chu family who was in the same room as Miss Shuang. The Chui family. A middle-aged man slammed the table and said angrily, "How could there be such a big oversight? Does Tsing Shichen not have a brain? Doesn't he know what time it is?" Then, a suspicious expression appeared on his face and he muttered, "Could it be Tsing Shichen? What good does this do for him?" Chui Qingming shook his head and said, "This case has attracted the attention of the court and the people. If it is found out, not only will he lose his position as the capital governor, but he will also lose his official position." The middle-aged man revealed a defeated expression. "That Lu Yi is a ruthless character. It is said that there is no case that he cannot solve. This time, I'm afraid that the Chu family." "One Chu family, one capital governor, we..." Chui Qingming clenched his fists and asked through gritted teeth, "What's the situation with the Chu family?" The middle-aged man shook his head and said, "The Ministry of Justice has not summoned Chu Ping for the time being, but it should be soon. In that place, no matter how tight-lipped one is, it is inevitable. What about that matter? The people no longer trust the Chu family. Even those great scholars do not dare to risk universal condemnation and speak casually. After all, this case has too many implications, and the situation is not optimistic." Chui Qingming thought for a long time and loosened his fists. He slowly said, "The Chu family can't be saved, but the capital governor may not." The middle-aged man hesitated for a moment, then asked, "Will we also be dragged into this matter?" Chui Qingming shook his head and said, "Tsing Shichen is a smart man. He knows what to do." The Ministry of Justice investigated cases very quickly, and this case was extremely fast. They had no choice but to act quickly. The entire capital was watching the progress of the case, so they did not dare to delay. And this case was actually not complicated. There was no need to summon the grandson of the Grand Tutor. The several bailiffs of the capital government who knew about the case confessed everything not long after they were brought to the Ministry of Justice. They had indeed been pursuing a criminal that day, but the criminal had not been in the fine sound pavilion. They had accidentally stumbled upon young Master Chu's deed, only to discover to their shock that young Master Chu, who liked to play tricks, had accidentally strangled the young lady to death. What happened next was logical. The Chu family was a famous noble family in the capital. How could they tolerate such a stain on a member of their family? Naturally, they used the power of the family to cover up this matter. Thus, the cause of Lady Shuang's death became a crime committed by a fugitive. The young master of the Chu family, who was originally the murderer, suddenly became the victim. In order to cover up the truth, they quickly disposed of Lady Shuang's body. When Lady Shuang's sister went to the Yamen to complain, they were afraid that the matter would be exposed, so they also arrested her and threw her into prison, adding insult to injury. This was simply insane. The injustice of Dou Yi was just a play and could not be taken seriously, but Lady Shuang's grievance had really happened right beside them. They had heard it with their own ears, seen it with their own eyes, and had always been paying attention. And during the course of the trial, the bailiffs of the capital government revealed another secret that further solidified Chu Ping's crime. Not long ago, the disappearance of a girl that had caused an uproar actually also had the shadow of this young master of the Chu family. However, this matter was still concealed by the all-powerful Chu family. It was precisely because of this young master of the Chu family's perverted hobby that Lady Shuang had died a wrongful death. Lady Shuang must have been forced by that beast. No wonder it snowed on the night of the Lantern Festival. I originally thought that it was a strange phenomenon that happened once every few decades, but it turns out that the heavens were crying out for Lady Shuang's injustice. To think that I had always thought that the Chu family was the backbone of our Jing kingdom, that Grand Tutor Chu was a just and righteous person, but who would have thought, he still has the cheek to say that Lord Li is a sycophant. What has Lord Li done? He has made great contributions to the country and the people, but he is not the least bit proud of it. He has even repeatedly resigned from his position and refused to be rewarded. And what about him? He covered up for his descendant, causing such a huge injustice. How can he still be called a scholar? He even wants to frame Lord Li, the pillar of our Jing kingdom. If not for Prime Minister Qin and the other officials in the imperial court, I'm afraid, sycophant, this is a true sycophant. Old and undying, a great traitor to the country. In the court, Lu Qingtian slammed the gavel. Summon Chu Ping. A few bailiffs quickly walked out of the main gate and headed towards the Chu family. At first, there were only a few people following behind them. Soon, it became 10, then 100. After passing through an alley, the crowd behind them could no longer be seen. Chapter 900. The Chu family. Is this real or not, Grand Tutor? What should we do? The public's discontent is already boiling outside. They're coming here. Several elders paced back and forth in the hall with anxious expressions on their faces. Because of the Fine Sound Pavilion murder case, the Chu family had already been pushed to the heart of the struggle. As the case progressed, although most of the officials could still maintain their calm due to the prestige of the Grand Tutor, the common people of the capital had already lost trust in the Chu family and the elders. Yesterday, a rather famous scholar had been smashed in the head with a rock for merely saying, a sycophant harming the country, against County Marquis Li. His body was covered in rotten leaves and he was in an extremely sorry state. When he returned home, even the walls of the courtyard had been pushed down. The cause of all this was the Chu family. The Chu family had won the hearts of the people, but they had also lost the hearts of the people. The old man before them was just an ordinary old man. Grand Tutor Chu sat in a chair with a calm expression. It was impossible to tell what was on his face. He only stared blankly at the door as if in thought, but his eyes were empty. A servant of the Chu family ran in a panic and shouted, "The Ministry of Justice is here." Several constables walked in and slowly bowed to the old man in the chair. The one in the lead said, "Lord Grand Tutor, we suspect that your grandson is related to a serious case. Please come with us, young Master Chu." A middle-aged man rushed out from the side and shouted, "You think you can take Ping away just because you suspect him?" The constable took out an item from his sleeve and handed it over. He bowed and said, "Lord Chu, this is a warrant from the Ministry of Justice. Please take a look." The middle-aged man didn't even look at the warrant. He said coldly, "How can a member of the Chu family be taken away so easily by the Ministry of Justice? Without His Majesty's imperial edict, I'd like to see who dares to act recklessly in the Chu family." The constable's face showed some difficulty when he heard this. This was the Chu family. The Chu family was different from other family clans. With Grand Tutor Chu present, even the members of the Ministry of Justice could not act too brazenly. Of course, if the Chu family was reasonable, things would naturally go smoothly. If they insisted, they would probably have to seek His Majesty's decree. The constable looked at him and bowed, "If that's the case, we'll take our leave first." After the bailiffs left, the middle-aged man quickly walked up to Grand Tutor Chu and said loudly, "Father, are you going to watch as they take Ping away? Qin Wen is right. The change of dynasties, the rise and fall of clans, these are all fated. How can there be a dynasty that can last for thousands of generations? How can there be a clan that can last forever?" Grand Tutor Chu climbed up from the chair with some effort and murmured, "This old man is really old. When one gets old, it's easy to become confused. Father, I'll leave this matter to you." A few constables walked out of the Chu family's door, but they did not leave. This was because in front of them was a crowd that stretched as far as the eye could see. Where is Chu Ping? Why didn't that beast come out? Is it because the Chu family refuses to release him? Before the constables could answer, the crowd had already surged forward. When the Chu family's gatekeeper saw the black mass of people, he was frightened out of his wits and immediately closed the door. "Hand over Chu Ping." Hand over the murderer. Return Lady Shuangshuang's innocence. The people inside, listen up. You have been surrounded. Hurry up and hand over Chu Ping. Inside the Chu family, they heard the deafening shouts coming from outside. Even the ground beneath their feet was trembling. The faces of the elders were pale and their hearts were filled with extreme fear. It was not difficult to imagine how many people were outside from the sound and the situation. Once the Chu family's door was breached, the entire Chu family would be razed to the ground. Inside the Chu family's ancestral hall, an elder with white hair and beard faced the memorial tablet of the Chu family ancestor. He knelt on a praying mat as tears streamed down his face. Unfilial descendant, you have brought shame to the Chu family ancestor. In the capital's county government, County Magistrate Liu, who was flipping through the case files, jumped in fright when he heard the voice that resounded throughout the capital. He was caught off guard and the pen in his hand fell to the ground. In the imperial palace, Emingsu put down the memorial and slowly walked out of the hall. She looked at the sky outside the palace walls. What's the situation outside? She seemed to be talking to herself. A female official walked over from the side and said respectfully, "Rest assured, Your Highness. I have already sent the Imperial Guards over. There won't be any trouble." In Hibiscus Garden, Emperor Jing, who was lying on the sickbed, slowly opened his eyes. Changde walked over and closed a window. Grand Tutor Chu, what a pity. Changde narrowed his eyes and said coldly, "His death is not to be regretted for delaying His Majesty's illness." In the Li family, Li Yi covered the little fellow's ears to prevent him from being frightened by the sounds outside. When the first sound had come, it had startled the little fellow who had been taking an afternoon nap. He immediately bawled. It was not easy to coax him back to sleep, but the sounds outside still continued. His hand covered Li Duan's ears, but a hint of melancholy and pity appeared on his face. At this moment, whether inside or outside the capital, no matter what they were doing, almost everyone stopped what they were doing and raised their heads to look at the sky. In the sky, there were birds fleeing in all directions in fright. Hand over Chu Ping. Hand over Chu Ping. The Chu family. The tightly shut doors slowly opened. Everyone was about to rush in when they saw the old man with the cane in front of them. They could not help but take a few steps back. The deafening sounds also gradually quieted down. All of this is my fault. Grand Tutor Chu handed his cane to the servant next to him and slowly knelt in front of the crowd. In a hoarse voice, he said, "I have let down that lady, let down the ancestors of the Chu family, and let down the people of the world. Grandfather, get up. This is not your fault." After a sigh, a figure limped out from the crowd at the back. He walked in front of Grand Tutor Chu and carefully helped him up. He smiled and said, "It's not a good feeling to kneel. You're already so old. Kneeling like this will hurt your legs." Two servants of the Chu family hurriedly helped Grand Tutor Chu. Chu Ping did not even look at the crowd discussing outside the door. He slowly knelt in front of Grand Tutor Chu and heavily kowtowed. "I didn't mean to kill Lady Shuangshuang. However, it's no longer important to say these things now. You've brought me to so many places in the past, seen so many sceneries, and met so many people. I'm really grateful to you." Chu Ping kowtowed again. As he stood up, he said, "Everyone says the capital is good. In the past, when I was outside, I always thought about coming back. Only after coming back did I realize that the capital is actually the most boring place. Thank you. I'm sorry." He stood up and apologized to Grand Tutor Chu. He turned to face the vast crowd outside the Chu family and said loudly, "Everything that I, Chu Ping, have done is my own doing. It has nothing to do with the Chu family." Thud. 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 He knelt down on both knees and heavily kowtowed 3 times to the crowd. After the 3 kowtows, there was no more sound. He knelt there silently. The constable closest to him seemed to have thought of something. He took a step forward and gently pushed him. Chu Ping's body fell sideways. A dagger was stabbed straight into his chest. Fresh blood stained his clothes. Chapter 901. Seeing that young Master Chu was clearly no longer breathing, the constable took 2 steps back with a look of disbelief. There was no end to the exclamations in the crowd. No one expected Chu Ping to be dead. He had chosen to commit suicide in front of so many people. Was this suicide to escape punishment or death to atone for his crimes? Pinger. A middle-aged man rushed out from the Chu family crowd and picked up the corpse on the ground. His face was filled with grief as he wailed out loud. Grand Tutor Chu's body went limp. Fortunately, the Chu family servants behind him supported him, preventing him from falling. After he straightened his body, he waved away the Chu family servants who were supporting him and walked to the constable. He asked in a hoarse voice, "Are you taking his corpse away as well?" The constable immediately took 2 steps back and bowed. The evidence in this case was conclusive. If Chu Ping were still alive, he would naturally be brought to the Ministry of Justice for interrogation. But since he was dead, he had to leave some face for the Chu family. Chu Ping's corpse was brought in and the Chu family's main door slowly closed. The crowd outside stood in front of the Chu family for a long time, but ultimately did not rush in. Pooey. What bullsh****. Someone spat viciously at the Chu family's main door before turning to leave. Someone said angrily, "Pooey. That old sycophant. Chu Ping is dead. Miss Shuang should rest in peace." Another person sighed and walked a few steps before turning back to face the Chu family's main door. Pooey. On this day, nearly all the citizens of the capital came to the Chu family's front door for a tour. Although everyone had left, the Chu family's front door had become filthy. Even the signboard on the front door had been smashed down. A noble family of a generation had been reduced to such a state overnight. It also made countless officials and nobles in the capital realize how powerful the commoners they usually looked down on were. Chu Ping had committed suicide to atone for his crimes, but the Chu family's matter was not over yet. When Grand Tutor Chu was still a scholar in the Jing kingdom, he had cleansed the emperor's side and admonished the emperor. This was a matter of great moral integrity. But now that his moral integrity had been stripped away, all he had done was to slander the important officials of the court, form a clique for personal gain, harbor evil intentions, and even commit treason such as forcing the emperor to leave the Golden Palace. Moreover, he had harbored criminals and abused his power for personal gain. How could he escape the punishment of the law? Every generation of Grand Tutors had resigned due to old age. Grand Tutor Chu was the only one who had been stripped of his title by the imperial court. Chu Ping's father had also been stripped of his official position. The Chu family's former glory was gone, and no one ever mentioned the title of the scholarly bones of the Jing kingdom. Under the heavy punishment of the court, although the Chu manor was still preserved and the property was not confiscated, the people of Jingdo never saw the tightly closed front door of the Chu family open again. None of the great scholars who had once stood with Grand Tutor Chu said anything about this matter. In reality, it wasn't that they didn't say anything. In the beginning, there were some who spoke out, but before the court could react, they all disappeared because of the public opinion. Chu Ping died and the truth came to light. Lady Shuang's injustice was cleared. The court felt wronged and set up a tomb for her in Jingdo for the people to worship. It also erected a warning monument for the government. The people would forever remember the name Ma Shuang. It was because of her death that the court paid attention to cases of injustice among the people and accelerated the reform of the law. It made the government truly a place to redress the grievances of the people and not a filthy place where those important people abused their power for personal gain, in this process, there were also some things that happened that exceeded everyone's expectations. After the case was concluded, the capital governor Tsing Shichin, who was deeply involved in this case, was restored to his position. Although he was also fined 3 years of his salary, compared to the impact of this case and the Chu family's ending, it was really nothing. The reason was that Lady Shuangshuang's older sister was very protective of this Sir Tsing in court. Although she had been arrested and thrown into the Yaman's prison, from beginning to end, she had not been mistreated or treated unfairly. The Yaman's bailiffs had taken good care of her in prison. Even when she was able to walk to the Ministry of Justice, it was the Yaman's people who escorted her. This clearly didn't make sense. If Tsing Shichin really wanted to seal her mouth, then he should have silenced her as soon as possible. Why did he give her so much preferential treatment? Even when she was being tortured, he played it down and went through the motions. In reality, when a few clever people heard this, they had already figured out the whole story. This Sir Tsang had arrested her and thrown her into prison. It looked like he was persecuting her, but he was actually protecting her. This was because the Chu family's background was very deep. Grand Tutor Chu alone could unite many of the great scholars, and even half of the officials in court to slander a pillar of the court who had made a great contribution to this country. What was a capital governor to them? He couldn't resist the Chu family, so he could only use this method to protect the girl. Otherwise, Lady Shuangshuang's case would probably never be overturned. A loyal official became a sycophant, a clean stream became a dirty stream, an upright official became a treacherous official, and then became an upright official again. Just like these days in the capital, the storm rose and then calmed, and then rose again. The injustice of Do-yi came to an end, and there was a new show in the brothel. The storm had calmed down a bit, and only a few ripples remained, enough to serve as a side dish for the people of the capital. You're talking about that sycophant. In a bun shop, a scholar in a scholarly robe had just spoken when a bun flew from the front and smashed into his face, followed by an angry voice. Who are you calling a sycophant? Say it again. The scholar picked up the bun that had fallen to the ground and looked at the shopkeeper of the bun shop. He said in a daze, I said that Grand Tutor Chu was a scholar, loved and respected by the people, and trusted by the officials. Who would have thought that he would do such a thing to ruin his reputation? It's really, the shopkeeper of the bun shop looked surprised. Ah, you mean that old sycophant. Who else could it be? The owner of the bun shop waved his hand and said awkwardly, Hi, I'm really sorry. I got addicted to smashing you scholars a while ago. It's fine. That bun is on me, it's free. The Chu family has now completely declined. No one in the capital is willing to have anything to do with them. After the reform of the law, the pressure on the government has increased a lot. Fortunately, after that period of busyness, the pressure has lessened a lot. Most cases are actually not that complicated, and it's not every day that there's a case of injustice. Without Grand Tutor Chu leading the way, that matter can be considered to have completely calmed down. Mingsu looked at Li Yi and sighed. It's finally over. After a long time without receiving a response, she extended her hand and waved it in front of Li Yi's eyes. Li Yi came back to his senses and asked, what did you just say? Mingsu looked at him and finally waved her hand. Nothing, how is this the end? Li Yi shook his head. He lifted the curtain of the carriage and said, This is just the beginning. He jumped down from the carriage and walked towards a building in front of him. It was an ancestral hall. In the ancestral hall, there was a stone tablet. The people of the capital lined up like flowing water. After placing an incense stick in front of the stone tablet, they left through the other side. Li Yi lined up and placed an incense stick in front of the stone tablet. He then stood to the side for a while before walking out. Mingzu was still standing next to the carriage, looking at another carriage. A green-clothed manservant walked over from that side. He bowed and said respectfully, My master invites you over. Li Yi looked at him and asked, "Who is your master?" "You'll know when you get there, my lord." Li Yi looked at the carriage that was parked in the corner and walked towards it. As he walked to the side of the carriage, the curtain was lifted by a withered hand, revealing a face covered in wrinkles. The old man seemed to have aged another 10 years since the last time he had seen him. Li Yi cupped his hands and said, "Grand Tutor, long time no see." Behind the curtain, the old man looked at him emotionlessly and said in a hoarse voice, "You once asked me if it was worth it. For my own selfishness, I buried the entire Chu clan. It was indeed not worth it." He shook his head, his eyes suddenly becoming sharp. "But the eldest imperial son returning to the capital to inherit the throne is natural. Have you ever thought about what you are doing? What you are doing is worth it. Just what do you want?" He looked at Li Yi and asked, "Prince Jin is young and you have no contact with the other princes. Tell me, just what do you want?" Li Yi looked at him and slowly asked, "Grand Tutor, do you really want to know?" Grand Tutor Chu said nothing and only stared fixedly at him. "Since Grand Tutor wants to know." Li Yi shook his head and walked into the carriage. Grand Tutor Chu leaned forward. He moved his head closer and whispered, "I won't tell you." Chapter 902. As the carriage drove past, there was a violent cough coming from inside. Mingsu turned back to look at Li Yi. "What did you say to Grand Tutor?" Li Yi shook his head. "Nothing." Mingsu looked at the carriage in front again. The coughing gradually faded away. She continued to look at him with a look that said, "Do you believe me?" "I swear on the honor of a sycophant." Li Yi raised 4 fingers. "I really didn't say anything to him." The main reason for the Chu family's demise was not the Cui family. Under normal circumstances, the 2 crimes that Chu Ping had committed, according to the previous laws of the Jin kingdom, were nothing more than a high-class person killing a low-class person and having to pay some silver taels. Even Chu Ping himself might not be severely punished. The real reason was Grand Tutor Chu. From his inaction in the beginning, or his shielding, to his worsening later, Grand Tutor Chu could not turn back, nor could the Chu family. All of this was caused by Grand Tutor Chu, who cherished his reputation and was extremely famous. The Chu family rose because of its reputation, and was also dragged down by it. It was a century-old family that had fallen to such a state. He had once asked Grand Tutor Chu whether it was worth it or not. Grand Tutor Chu did not answer, but gave the answer with his actions. But no matter what, this old man was once prominent and was still watched by countless people. If he was told that the king of Shu was not his majesty's biological son, and that he wanted Mingsu to be the empress, Grand Tutor Chu might have a heart attack or a brain hemorrhage. If he was not careful, he would not be able to clear his name. The 2 did not get on the carriage again, but walked back. When they were about to walk past the ancestral hall, 2 figures walked toward them. The middle-aged man walking in front raised his head and was slightly stunned. He immediately cupped his hands and said, "Greetings, Your Highness." "Greetings, Lord Li." Mingsu turned back to look at Li Yi, the doubt in her eyes obvious. "Qin He, the 5th son of Prime Minister Qin." Li Yi explained to her, then looked at 5th Master Qin and pointed at his hair, his eyes full of doubt. "Oh, about that." 5th Master Qin smiled and said, "I'm old, so I'm not like you young people." Li Yi nodded and then slightly cupped his hands. "Thank you, Prime Minister Qin, for dealing with the matters in the court recently. Please thank him on my behalf. I will personally visit him another day to thank him. My father is only doing what he thinks is right. We can't say anything." 5th Master Qin shook his head and said, "However, I will convey Lord Li's message." Li Yi looked at the ancestral hall behind him and asked, "Did you also come to pay your respects to Lady Shuangshuang?" 5th Master Qin nodded and said, "Although Lady Shuangshuang is no longer here, her death is meaningful." There are so many people who remember her, and there are countless people who are deeply grateful to her. Her death alone accomplished something that the entire court could not do. It is worthy of worship. On the way back, Mingsu looked at him and asked, "Is he Qin He, the Qin He that Uncle Wang mentioned?" "What? He doesn't look like him." She shook her head and said, "I just feel that a person who is worthy of Uncle Wang's evaluation shouldn't be like this." Don't be fooled by this fifth master of the Qin clan's sloppy appearance. Li Yi smiled and said, "He's a truly powerful person." In the ancestral hall, after the two of them burned incense in front of the stone tablet, they entered the ancestral hall. As soon as they entered, they saw a statue of a woman the size of a normal person. Below the statue was a spacious platform. After people burned incense outside, they would place the things they brought to pay their respects on this platform. The burly man asked mysteriously, "Fifth Master, the person beside Lord Li just now was the princess. What, do I not look like her?" Fifth Master Qin casually asked as he placed a plate of pastries in the box on the platform. "To be honest, she doesn't look like her." The burly man nodded. Just as he was wondering why he hadn't noticed before, he suddenly heard a cracking sound. He turned his head to look at Fifth Master beside him and said in surprise, "Fifth Master, where did you get the apple in your hand?" Fifth Master Qin casually pointed to the fruit plate on the platform that was clearly missing an apple. "There, it tastes pretty good. Do you want it?" "This." The burly man looked at him in disbelief. "This was given to Lady Shuang by someone else." "Fifth Master, you, Shuang." Fifth Master Qin shook his head and said, "She doesn't like eating apples. It's a waste to keep it." Crack. Another sound. "What are you doing over there?" At this moment, there were still many people in the ancestral hall. When someone raised his head and saw this scene, he immediately stood up in anger. "You even dare to eat something given to Lady Shuang? Has your conscience been eaten by a dog?" "What? Who did it?" "Take them to the officials." The burly man grabbed an apple and grabbed Fifth Master Qin's arm. He hurriedly said, "What are you waiting for? Run." A moment later, in an alley in Jingdo, Fifth Master Qin panted heavily. He patted a footprint on his body and asked, "What? How is this apple?" The burly man took a bite and nodded. "It's crispy and sweet. Why doesn't Lady Shuang like it?" Fifth Master Qin leaned against the wall and sighed. "Yes, I also don't understand why she doesn't like it." He was silent for a moment. After waiting for the burly man to finish eating the apple, he said, "Wu Er, how long have you been following me?" The burly man froze for a moment. In the next moment, he threw away the apple and clapped his hands. Solemnly, he said, "Fifth Master, tell me, what do you want me to do this time?" "Go follow the little Duke and see what he's been doing these days. I'm the best at following people." The burly man patted his chest. "With me doing things, Fifth Master can rest assured. The trail is broken." Li Yi sighed and said, "How could it be broken?" Lu Yi shook his head and said, "The Ministry of Justice and the Secret Intelligence Bureau couldn't find anything. The person behind this case must have great power in Jingdo." Li Yi rubbed the space between his brows and suddenly felt a headache coming on. He tilted his head to look at the princess and said helplessly, "Now there's only the Cui family left. Why don't we choose another path?" Mingsu looked at him and asked in confusion, "What path?" "I know a path that leads directly to the central lake of the Academy of Mathematics. If we go at night, we'll definitely not be discovered. Why don't we take advantage of the darkness and wind, sink the Cui family into the lake?" "You also think this is a good idea, right? It's simple, convenient, and saves time. Do you want me to help you kidnap Consort Cui out of the palace?" "If you can help, that would be great." Li Yi met her eyes. Lu Yi quickly looked out the window. A moment later, Li Yi shook his head and said, "Forget it. It's dark and I can't see the road clearly. Let's think about it at length. If the Chui family could be taken down so easily, father wouldn't have waited until now. Mingzi shook her head and said, 20 years ago, their power had already seeped into every corner of the imperial court. They also have a good reputation among the people. Although they are not as powerful as before, they still have a foundation that cannot be underestimated. Li Yi sighed and said, that's why I said it's more convenient to choose another path. Fong strode in from outside and handed him an envelope. He said, young master, there's news from Wu Air. Li Yi opened the envelope and looked at it. He handed it to Lu Yi and said with a smile, isn't it connected now? Chapter 903. Li Yi handed the letter to Lu Yishui and said, keep an eye on Qin Yu. You should be able to find something. Lu Yishui took the letter and looked at it. He nodded and said, I understand. Mingzi seemed to understand what he wanted to do. When she walked into the courtyard, she turned around and asked, are you going to deal with the Chui family the same way you dealt with the Chu family? The Chui family has many henchmen. They won't do many things themselves. As long as the matter of the king of Shu is not exposed, unless the Chui family is plotting a rebellion, it won't have much impact on the general situation. Li Yi shook his head and said, let's take one step at a time. A dam of 1,000 miles will collapse because of an ant's nest. If we add up all the things one by one, it might be the last straw that breaks the camel's back. Mingzhu's tone was firm. We can't let father know about that matter no matter what. Of course I know that. Otherwise, the Chui family will die countless times for this crime. Li Yi had thought about this contradiction many times. It was obvious that it was easy to destroy the Chui family through that matter, but it was easier to destroy the old emperor. They couldn't take this risk. The two reached a tacit understanding on this matter. There was nothing to discuss. Li Yi saw Mississippi Lu on the other side of the courtyard. She seemed to have just finished practicing. He thought for a moment and waved his hand. Rui, come here for a moment. Mississippi Lu put down autumn water and walked over. She cast an inquiring look at him. Li Yi looked at the two standing together. After a moment, he looked at Mississippi Lu and said in surprise, I find that you have been growing recently. I remember that you were shorter than the princess at the beginning. Now you are the same height. Mississippi Lu looked at him. When have I ever been shorter than her? Ah, you didn't. Li Yi shook his head and said, then I must have remembered wrongly again. I don't know what happened to my memory recently. Li Yi walked the princess out the door and saw sister-in-law Fang walking over from afar. When he saw the person beside her, he was instantly stunned. He closed his eyes in disbelief, and when he opened them again, sister-in-law Fang was already talking to the woman beside her with a smile. Li Yi looked back at Mississippi Lu and asked, who's the girl next to Mrs. Fang? I've never seen her before. Mississippi Lu looked in that direction and said, yesterday, when Aunt Fang went to the temple to offer incense, she met Miss Xiao on the road. Miss Xiao came to the capital to seek shelter with her relatives, but she couldn't find her and was robbed of her traveling expenses. Aunt Fang pitied her and temporarily took her in. Miss Xiao. Li Yi nodded and sighed. Sister-in-law Fang is really kind. Sister-in-law Fang actually treats people very well, and Uncle Fang is also not bad. It's just that he looks a little fierce usually. Li Yi nodded. Speaking of which, you two are quite similar, but you don't know how to use a broom when you fight, which is much better than her. Mississippi Lu's temper had really improved recently, and Li Yi couldn't help but feel that his youth was gone forever. She could even cook a bowl of noodles that tasted pretty good by herself. The unruly, willful, unreasonable, and unworldly Mississippi Lu seemed to be gone forever. Of course, the person who made him feel that time could change a person the most was Fang. He had quietly sent sister-in-law Fang's biggest enemy to her side, and the two of them could get along with each other like sisters. There was harmony inside and outside the house. Li Yi didn't think he had the ability to do so. Some things have to be faced. I don't have the ability of the son-in-law, so of course I have to find another way. When Fong said this, his face was shrouded in a sacred glow. For him, this was indeed a big deal. To be able to let sister-in-law Fong and Little Red get along like sisters, this was simply a fantasy, unbelievable, and something that he didn't even dare to think about in the past. In contrast, his own affairs were more difficult to deal with. Although Drunk Mo's tone had relaxed these days, it seemed that she was still not completely mentally prepared. And this was just Drunk Mo. The road was long, and the revolution had not yet succeeded. Comrades still needed to work hard. In the old house of the Xing family, Drunk Mo helped them make tea. When they walked back to the room, Xing Shichen said, "After this incident, the Chui family probably doesn't trust me much anymore." This did not come as a surprise to Li Yi. That case involved a lot of people, and it was the focus of the entire capital. Removing him from it would undoubtedly be a hell of a challenge. One careless move and it would cause a wave of public opinion. When the Chui family knew that they couldn't protect the Chu family, they had actually used the power of the court to protect him, the capital governor. However, they encountered great obstacles, and in the end, they had no choice but to stop. In this way, the subsequent reversal of public opinion seemed extremely suspicious. With the protection of that girl, if the Chui family still didn't suspect them, they would have been eaten up in the capital. Although the king of Shu is still in Shuzhou, as long as His Majesty doesn't appoint a crown prince, he is still the most promising. Xing Shichen looked at him and said slowly, "Once something happens to His Majesty, the king of Shu will inherit the throne. This is almost without a doubt. Until now, are you still not willing to tell me which side you are on? Although the Chui family probably won't do anything to you, you still have to be careful." Li Yi didn't answer. He just warned him and turned to go inside. A thoughtful look appeared on Xing Shichen's face. After a moment, he dipped his finger in the tea and wrote 2 words on the table. Soon, he crossed out the 2 words, Prince Jean, on the stone table. In the situation where His Majesty still had adult princes, the possibility of a child inheriting the throne was too small. For the sake of the overall situation, His Majesty would not make such a choice. On this point, Li Yi definitely knew better than he did. As for the other princes, whether it was status or talent, they were far inferior. More importantly, those princes were far away in their fiefdoms, and Li Yi had no contact with them. Apart from Prince Jean, among the princes, there was not a single one who had both a high status and a close relationship with him. However, he had a close relationship with the princesses. She had offended the king of Shu for Princess Yongning, causing the Chui family to see him as a thorn in their side. Princess Shaning was also very close to him, and there was no barrier when they got along. As for the eldest princess, needless to say, it was said that they were close friends when they were in Qing and Prefecture. In the past few years in the capital, the eldest princess established the Women's College and the Women's Union. She was deeply loved by the women in the capital, and founded the academy, which won the hearts of the scholars in the world. Ever since she took over the government, all the civil and military officials in the court would praise the eldest princess when they mentioned her. There were countless officials in the court who were as loyal to her as they were to His Majesty. Who would still dare to treat her as a woman? Not to mention, great scholar Chu's actions backfired and he lost the hearts of the people. Her Highness reformed the law, which was also applauded by the people. Behind all these things, there was actually his shadow. It was strange that he didn't know what he was thinking. Instead of supporting a prince, he spared no effort to do these things for the eldest princess. What was he thinking? Xing Shichen picked up the teacup and put it down again, the expression on his face frozen. Chapter 904. In the room, Madame Chin was teaching Drunken ink embroidery. For the daughters of the noble families in the capital city, embroidery was a necessary skill. Most of them would embroider their wedding dresses with their own hands before they got married. Seeing Li Yi come in, she quickly hid the wedding dress. Li Yi didn't know what she was thinking. She actually looked at the wedding dress more secretively than the belly band. He had even seen her wearing the belly band several times, but she didn't even show him a wedding dress that wasn't embroidered. Madam Chen put their hands together and said, "You two, it's time to pick a day and set the date early. You can't keep dragging it on like this. It's still early." Drunken Ink lowered her head and whispered. Li glanced at her and said, "What do you mean it's still early?" "It's not early." Watching her break free from his hand and run out quickly, Li shook his head helplessly. Although she usually looked very bold, after the two of them got closer, she became shy. Third Miss Chen looked at her running out with a smile. After a long time, she turned her head and sighed, saying, "You are still young and don't know the dangers of the court. A family can live in peace and harmony. Even if it's a little dull, it's much better than facing those deceitful battles every day." Li lowered his head but didn't speak. No one liked to live in deceit and conspiracy all day long. Compared with this, wasn't it more interesting to play with the children, Rui, and the proud Lolita at home? If you want stability, you must first endure turbulence. She looked outside the door. The two women were talking about something. She turned back and said, "I think Ruoqing is also thinking about you. Although Drunken Ink is here, you can't always ignore her. I can see that her heart is actually more bitter than anyone else. You can't let her down." "I know." Li looked outside the door and nodded. "I won't." She looked at Li, and a rare hint of resentment appeared on her face. "Your father was so devoted back then. In order to elope with your mother, he didn't even want the inheritance of his family. Why is it that when it comes to you, you just have to provoke so many debts of love?" An awkward expression appeared on Li's face. Unable to refute, he could only remain silent. She patted the back of Li's hand and said, "All right, it's your good fortune to be able to gain the favor of so many wonderful people. I only hope that in the future, you won't hurt anyone's heart." After saying that, he stood up and said with a smile, "When it comes to you, I can't help but talk too much. Accompany them well, I'm going back." Li stood up at the same time and saw her out. He watched as Qinchong walked out of the tea house across the street. A servant girl of the Qin estate helped her into the carriage. Just as Qinchong was about to get into the other carriage, Li suddenly asked, "Is official Qin this free every day?" Qinchong's hand, which had already lifted the curtain, lowered again. He countered with a question, "Could it be that official Li plans to go to the princess and report me? I'm not the kind of person who would report on someone." Li shook his head. "I just want to advise official Qin that you are an official of the imperial court. Every month, there will be a few days where you have to pretend to be working hard. Of course, other than this, I also have a small matter to remind official Qin." He slightly lowered his voice and said, "Stay as far away from the Chui clan as possible." A scornful expression appeared on Qinchong's face. Just as he was about to speak, he heard the second half of Qin Chongqing's words and froze. He asked, "What do you mean?" "Official Qin will understand." Li looked at him and said once more. Then he turned and walked back into the courtyard. Qinchong was left standing there, his expression solemn. Thousands of thoughts had already flashed through his mind, and in the end, they all boiled down to a certain message. The Chui clan was probably going to change. When Li walked back, Zue Mo walked out of the room and asked, "Has Madam Chen left?" "She's gone back." Li walked over and put his arm around her slender waist. "She asked me to spend more time with you too." Who asked you to spend more time?" She looked frantically at Xing Shichen, who was sitting in the courtyard drinking tea, and hurriedly pushed him away. Then, she seemed to realize something. Looking at him, she asked uncertainly, "You too?" Li Yi turned and walked quickly in Xing Shichen's direction. "Lord Tseng, what do you think about that matter just now? I think that the king of Shu has no talent or virtue, and is indeed not suitable for the throne. Otherwise, the country that His Majesty and the courtiers have painstakingly stabilized would probably be destroyed in his hands." Xing Shichen thought for a moment and said, "Among the many princes, His Highness King Jin is an outstanding person, and his status is equally noble. However, King Jin is too young, and it is difficult for him to ascend to the throne. At present, apart from His Majesty, the only one who can govern the country well is the eldest princess. However, the eldest princess has already set a precedent by assisting the government." "It is really?" Li Yi looked at him in surprise and asked, "Is this what we were talking about just now?" What Xing Shichen said was very reasonable. In fact, the more they talked about it, the more he felt how difficult it was to let Emingzu wear that uniform and experience the temptation of the dragon robe. Their original purpose was just to prevent this great country from falling into the hands of the king of Shu. Now, the king of Shu had been eliminated in advance. She did not want the old emperor to know about this, but she would never agree to let the Li family's country fall into the hands of others. In the pavilion in the middle of the lake, Her Highness nodded. "That's right. No matter what, this country cannot fall into the hands of the king of Shu." This pavilion had become a place where the two of them talked in secret more and more frequently. Because there was lake water everywhere and the sound of waves was mixed in, unless someone had clairvoyance and hearing, they would not be able to hear what they were talking about. He looked around. There seemed to be a flash of light in the trees by the shore of the lake and disappeared in an instant. Emingzu suddenly said, "King Ning has returned to Qing and prefecture." Li Yi looked back at her and asked, "It is already June. They should have returned long ago. What is so strange about this?" "It is because King Ning has returned that it is strange." Emingzi shook her head and said, "This time, only King Ning has returned and taken the military seal. It is enough to mobilize 2,000 soldiers. What can 2,000 soldiers do? It is enough to confiscate the ancestral home of the Chui family in Qing and prefecture. As for rebellion, I'm afraid it is far from enough." Li Mingzhu looked at the surface of the lake for a long time before turning around. A hint of confusion appeared on her face. "I suspect that Fu Wang and Ning Wang Shu are hiding something from us, and from the court officials. I can't see it." In the low trees by the lake, Li Xian looked at the two people in the pavilion with their backs facing him and murmured helplessly. With great difficulty, he saw Emingzu turn around. He immediately became alert and tightened his grip on the binoculars in his hands. "I am pregnant with father, thou emperor, from the court officials." He frowned and murmured, "You spoke so fast. How can I hear you clearly?" A look of doubt surfaced on his face. What exactly was Mingzhu thinking? She had hidden it from Uncle Huang and the court officials. She seemed to be at a loss. Clatter. As if realizing something, he sucked in a cold breath. Shock appeared on his face. The binoculars in his hands suddenly fell to the ground and he jumped out of the bushes. Li Yi and Emingzu raised their heads and saw Li Xian, who was wearing a garland made of tree branches and decorated with a few small flowers. Surprise appeared on their faces at the same time. Chapter 905. Today, Li Xian was dressed in dark clothes, and the wreath of branches on his head was particularly eye-catching. If he smeared some camouflage paint on his face, he would look even more like the real deal. I saw what you said just now." He ran all the way here, panting heavily, and the shock on his face had not faded. Li Yi did not know why he was dressed like this, and asked in surprise, "What did you see?" Li Xian pointed at the binoculars hanging around his neck, and Li Yi was even more confused. Li Xian looked at the two of them, and his eyes were filled with extreme surprise. I don't need to listen to what you're saying. I only need to look at your lips to know what you're saying. Li Yi looked at him, and his expression was slightly shocked. You've learned to read lips? Without waiting for Li Xian to nod, he remembered that during this period of time, whenever the two of them spoke, he would always stare at his own lips. Could it be that he was really learning to read lips? Then he looked at the binoculars hanging around his neck. Could it be that the purpose of him learning to read lips was to peep and eavesdrop? This guy, what was going on in his mind? Li Yi's lips moved, and he asked in disbelief, Did you see what I said just now? It's useless even if you scold me. Li Xian's gaze swept back and forth between the two of them, and he said, I've already seen what you've said just now. Li Yi and Mingzhu looked at each other, and they both felt a headache coming on. The reason why the two of them chose this place was to avoid Li Xian. After all, with his character of wanting to see the world in chaos, if he knew about this matter, he might cause some trouble. But no matter how careful they were, they never expected that he would purposely learn to read lips, and the binoculars hanging around his neck were probably high-quality products from the Academy of Science. How could there be such a bored person in the world? This is really too disgraceful. A worried expression appeared on Li Xian's face. He looked at Mingzhu, and said with a pained expression, You are the princess, you too, how could you do such a thing? Looking at the extremely agitated Li Xian, Li Yi looked back at Mingzhu and said, Why don't we sink into the lake? Looks like we can't hide it anymore. Li Yi sighed, and looked at Mingzhu again, and asked, You or me? Li Mingzhu waved her hand and sat on a stone chair to the side. She looked at the calm lake and said, Speak. Li Yi nodded. He looked at Li Xian and asked again, What did you hear just now? You don't have to test me. Li Xian glanced at the two of them and said, If the imperial uncle, the court officials, and the entire world were to find out about this disgraceful and heinous act, the two of you would no longer have a place in the Jing kingdom. Li Yi shook his head. It seemed that he was really bored to a certain extent, and indeed learned to read lips. At this point, there was no need to test him anymore. Although the king of Shu has been chased to Shu province, and his reputation has been ruined, he is still the eldest son of the emperor. If something happens to his majesty, he will most likely make a comeback, and even ascend the throne. Li Yi looked at him, and said, The princes of his majesty have no talent or virtue. If the world falls into their hands, it will end in defeat sooner or later. We have come step by step to where we are today, and we can't let the court go back to its original path. Moreover, with the power in Mingzhu's hands, she will not have a good ending for any of the princes who succeed the throne. Hearing this, Li Xian's face darkened. How could he not understand this logic? Only Uncle Emperor was broad-minded enough to allow the eldest princess to rule the country, and hand over all the affairs of the country to her. Until now, most of the court officials had acquiesced to the eldest princess's existence. But if the new emperor succeeded the throne, he would definitely not allow these powers to be held in the hands of a princess. Even the Academy of Sciences would be out of his control. The precondition for their peace was that Uncle Huang was still in control of the country. Once he was gone, many people's fates would be turned upside down. However, although this was the truth, it had nothing to do with what they said. That was not the point. One was an unmarried princess, and the other was an important official with a family. The two of them were together secretly, and no one would find out, and everything would be fine. But now that Mingzhu was pregnant, they could not hide it for long. Once this matter was made public, it would become the biggest scandal in the royal family, and the two of them would be condemned by everyone. Even if they could keep their lives, they would no longer have a place in the Jing kingdom. Why are you so careless? Li Xian looked at them exasperatedly, and sighed, and said, Go to a place where no one knows you, and don't come back. Let me finish first. Li Yi looked at him calmly, and Li Xian looked at him, lowered his head, and said, "Go ahead." Actually, Prince Jean is the most suitable person to inherit His Majesty's position. Li Yi looked in the direction of the arithmetic school, and said slowly, "But he is too young, and can't take up the heavy responsibility, so, why are you saying this to me at this time?" "Shut up, let me finish." After Li Xian completely shut up, Li Yi said again, "So, we have to push Mingzu to that position." Li Xian was stunned, and looked at him in surprise, and asked, "Push to what position?" "His Majesty's position." Li Xian looked at him, and then looked at Mingzu, and rubbed his head, and waved his hand. "Wait a minute, I'm a little confused now, let me sort it out first." After a long time, he raised his head again, and asked, "Isn't Mingzu pregnant?" Her Royal Highness stood up abruptly, and her pretty face blushed. She looked at him and said angrily, "What nonsense are you talking about?" Li Xian said in a daze, "I clearly saw that you said you were pregnant. How long have you been learning to read lips?" Li Yi thought for a moment and suddenly asked. "Less than a month," Li Xian said after thinking for a moment. Li Yi looked straight at him and asked, "You rushed over because you thought Mingzu was pregnant?" Li Xian nodded and said confidently, "What else could it be?" "What you said just now, was it because of this?" Li Yi rubbed his forehead, and asked again. Li Xian was surprised, and said, "Could it be that Mingzu is not pregnant, and I'm seeing things?" After saying that, he suddenly had a look of realization, and looked straight at Li Yi. Wait, what did you say just now? What position should we push Mingzu to?" Li Yi sighed, and turned to look at Mingzu. "Why don't we just sink?" Chapter 906. Such an important matter. Li Xian's face was gloomy as he paced back and forth in the pavilion. Occasionally, he pointed at the two of them. Li Yi and Mingzu were both silent. Influenced by their traditional education and beliefs, this was the first time they had heard of this matter. It was indeed difficult for them to accept. "How dare you not tell me?" Li Xian slammed his palm on the stone table and asked angrily, "Such an important matter, how dare you hide it from me? Are you not treating me as one of your own?" The anger on his face only lasted for a moment before disappearing in the next moment. He clapped his hands and said with a face full of surprise, "Why didn't I think of this idea before?" To him, it would be best if he could maintain the current status quo. However, no matter who inherited the throne, with his identity and position, he would not have a good life in the capital. However, who was Mingzu? She had grown up with him, and the three heroes of the capital had gone through thick and thin together. It was as if they were wearing the same pants. Although it was the two of them who were wearing the same pants now, based on the current situation, if Mingzu could really sit on the throne, it would definitely be the best outcome. However, although she was also the child of the emperor, she was a woman. Would it be difficult for a woman to become the emperor? Thinking about it carefully, the dragon robe did not look good on her either. This matter is not certain yet. Let's not talk about it for now. Li Yi pressed on his shoulder to calm him down. He said, "You cannot tell anyone about what happened today, including His Majesty, your father, mother, the crown princess, and your brother Xin. Don't worry, I know the severity of this matter. Other than the three of us, I will not let a fourth person know." Li Xian nodded solemnly, then said, "Based on what you said, the biggest obstacle in front of us now is the Cui family. The Cui family has done such a rebellious thing, and they are still jumping around in the court all day long. It is really annoying to see. Should we go all out?" He turned his head to look. "I think this lake in the academy is not bad." Although he didn't know from whom did Li Xian learn this unreliable idea of sinking into the lake, he was right about one thing. As long as the Cui family didn't fall, they wouldn't have peaceful days. This time, it was fine if they didn't make a move, but if they made a move, the Cui family wouldn't be able to make a comeback, once and for all. As for the secret between the two of them being known by him, it did not affect them much. Li Xian, who was born with a short brain, was muddle-headed on many things, but he had never messed up on a major matter. At least he knew that in the future, he wouldn't be like before, always causing trouble at the drop of a hat. He came out to wander around after learning half of lip reading and ended up making such a big mistake. However, this incident also reminded him that there were even perverts in this world who specialized in lip reading and hid in the dark with binoculars to peep at him. In the future, no matter what he did, it was better to be extra careful. After stepping into the house, all the messy thoughts in his mind disappeared. Wife, children, sister-in-law, and the little servant girl who was about to grow up and was gradually getting rid of the silly adorable. This was another small world, blocking all the things that were incompatible with the word home outside. Mississippi Lou was holding a piece of paper in her hand and saying something to Rui. It was probably because she encountered some words that she didn't know. Rui was the kind of person who could calm down no matter what she did. When the two sisters were young, they also did literacy and other things, but it was probably useless for Mississippi Lou. Li picked up a few pieces of paper that were messily placed on the table and looked at them. Most of them were about the Lu League. The Lu League had already formed a stable system. It was not an exaggeration to say that it was an organization. The elite disciples were all skilled in martial arts. They were famous martial arts masters on the master ranking list and the chivalry ranking list. As for other places, it was more of a relationship similar to a contract. There were many masters in the league and they had strong financial support. They took what they needed from the people in the martial arts world and cooperated with tacit understanding. It could be said that they had completely changed the current situation of the martial arts world. As the leader of the Lu League, Mississippi Lou's growth was amazing. Of course, this did not refer to a specific part of her body. Other than physical growth, there was also psychological growth. Thinking back to 3 years ago, the girl in white who was riding on a horse and holding a sword, and now the girl who frowned and bit her thumb, staring at the piece of paper in front of her seriously, were like two different people. There was another stack of papers on the table. Li Yi also flipped through them. They were all information about the Wu Kingdom. As the only country in the vicinity that had fallen into internal strife, although the imperial court of the Wu Kingdom was strong, there were too many rebels and traitors in the country. It could not be suppressed in a short time. The surrounding countries might have some other ideas besides watching them make a fool of themselves. Seeing him walk in, Rui seemed to have seen her savior. She hurriedly said, my husband is back. Quickly help Rui take a look at what's written on this. I've been having a headache these past few days. The reason why Rui had a headache was that Mississippi Lou would ask her whenever she encountered something that she did not understand. In fact, Rui only recognized a few more words than her. When it came to the meaning of poems and articles, she would also have a headache. As for why Mississippi Lou did not ask him directly, Li Yi also felt strange. After Rui spoke, Mississippi Lou reluctantly handed the paper to him. Li Yi glanced at it and knew the reason why Mississippi Lou had a headache. This was something similar to the Imperial Court spy report. The words and sentences were not like ordinary letters. It was very official and difficult to understand. It was normal for people like Mississippi Lou, who were still in the stage of literacy, to not understand it. Li Yi looked at it and said, "It says that Princess Duanrong of the Wu Kingdom joined forces with a traitor and conquered 2 provinces of the Wu Kingdom in a row. She was captured alive by the Imperial Court and will be executed in a few days." What? Mississippi Lou's expression changed dramatically. Of course it's a lie. Li Yi put the paper aside and said, "It's true that they conquered 2 provinces. They have a lot of soldiers under their command. They used to be in the military camp and have good strength. Now they are in a stalemate with the Imperial Court of the Wu Kingdom. Nothing will happen in a short time." Mississippi Lou took a deep breath, and her chest rose and fell a few times. She looked at him and said, "Come here, I'll show you something good." Did she think he was stupid? If he went with her now, nothing good would come out of it. Li Yi took Li Duan from Rui's arms. After such a long time of guidance, the 8-month-old little guy could make clearer father and mother. Of course, he still called Xiao Nyang more often. Rui sat down beside him and said softly, "I went to see Sister Zumo today." Li Yi turned to look at her. I've already talked to Sister Zumo. She said that after a few days, she will move in with us. Li Yi looked at her in surprise. She agreed. Rui looked at him in confusion and asked, "Why not?" Li Yi suddenly doubted the meaning of life. He nagged her about this matter every day. All his efforts were not as good as a word from Rui. This was a bit too hurtful. When he walked out of the door gloomily, he met a little maid who came in. She looked up at him and said, "Young master, second miss asked you to go to her room. She has a question to ask you." What question could he not ask just now? Why did he have to go to her room? Walking to Mississippi Lu's room on the other side, the door was open. Li knocked on the door and stepped in. Mississippi Lu sat at the table, looked up, and said, "Close the door." Li closed the door, then turned his head and asked in confusion, "What's the problem? Why close the door?" Chapter 907. At the door of Mississippi Lu's room, Xiaohuan leaned against a pillar while munching on melon seeds. She carefully listened to the movements inside the room. Inside the room, Li Yi was thrown onto the bed. He covered his buttocks and glared at Mississippi Lu angrily. He said he had a question for her. He was just curious why she closed the door. It turned out that she was going to beat him up. What a heartless fellow. To think that he was so kind and considerate of her. Li Yi looked at her warily and threatened, "If you continue to act like this, I won't accompany you to the Wu Kingdom." "What did you say?" Mississippi Lu was stunned. Her hand that was about to fall stopped in the air. She asked, "What did you say just now? Say it again." "I was thinking of accompanying you to the Wu Kingdom after I'm done with my work. Now, I need to think about it." His original intention was not to go to the Wu Kingdom. Counting the days, Lin Wanru should have reached the Qi Kingdom by now. The business there was about to start. In this year, the situation in the fringe had also changed greatly. Every once in a while, there would be news. He had to go and take a look. Since Mississippi Lu was so concerned about her precious disciple, he might have to make a trip to the Wu Kingdom. Of course, before leaving the capital, he had to solve all the remaining problems. To the Wu Kingdom. Mississippi Lu's beautiful eyes lit up. She asked, "When?" "I was thinking of a month or 2. Li Yi shook his head and said, "But now. I'm not going." "You." Mississippi Lu's face was filled with anger. The slender hand that was about to fall fiercely stopped in mid-air fell again. But this time, it was with a gentle force. A faint smile appeared on her face. She asked with concern, "Does it still hurt?" Li Yi did not have the chance to enjoy Mississippi Lu's gentle massage. He jumped up from the bed and ran out of the door at an unbelievable speed. As he ran out, he grabbed Xiao Huan's melon seeds. He ate them while thinking. So gentle, so gentle. Mississippi Lu is crazy. She's really crazy. "Miss, when are we moving over?" "Miss, do you want me to help you pack?" "Miss, if we move over, what about Sister Ruoqing?" "Since elder Sister Ruoqing is going there, Xiao Zhu will also go there, right?" Xing Zumo, who was embroidering a wedding dress, raised her head and glanced at Xiao Chui, who was carrying a small bag and wandering in front of her for almost an hour. Xing Zumo lowered her head again and said, "If you really can't wait, move over first. Anyway, there are other maids in the manor." Xiao Chui hurriedly put down the small bundle and came over with a smile. How could Xiao Chui understand Miss better than the other maids? Of course, I want to be with Miss. Goddess Luo Shui waved her hand and said, "Stay away from me, you're blocking the light." After chasing Xiao Chui away, he lowered his head and looked at a pattern on the wedding dress. He stared blankly for a long time before a vexed expression appeared on his face. "Oh no, I forgot what kind of needle technique to use on this piece." She put the wedding dress and the needle and thread aside and walked towards Ruoqing's room. She remembered that when she was teaching her yesterday, she had demonstrated the steps on another brocade handkerchief. During the day, there was usually no one in her room. Sometimes, there were too many things to do and she might not come back at night. She pushed open the door and very quickly found the brocade handkerchief on the table. She picked it up and looked at it for a while. Not long after, she remembered the steps and put the brocade handkerchief back. Just as she was about to leave, her footsteps suddenly stopped. She turned around and looked at the bed. On the bed, under the pillow, the corner of a book was exposed. She was startled. This was the booklet that was pressed under the pillow by elder sister Ruoqing. For her to hide it like this, it must be something very important or private. Even if the two of them were very close, it would not be good to take it out and look at it when she was not around. She shook her head and walked in the direction of the door. When she walked to the door, her footsteps stopped again and she looked back at the bedside. How about just taking a look? She looked left and right, closed the door like a thief, and returned to the bedside. She carefully took out the booklet under the pillow. There were no words on the cover. She carefully flipped to the next page. The first year of Jing He, the first day of the 7th month. It was indeed elder sister Ruoqing's diary. She knew that Ruoqing had the habit of writing diaries since she was young. Although she did not write every day, she had accumulated a few thick books. At that time, she actually wanted to peek at elder sister Ruoqing's little secrets. However, Ruoqing hid it very well. After a few unsuccessful attempts, she gave up. At this moment, although she was a little frightened, she was actually a little excited that her wish had been fulfilled. Her gaze quickly moved up. The first year of Jing He, the first day of the 7th month. What happened in that year's 7th month? That sour scholar wrote a love poem for her and was chased out of the jade courtyard by her mother. This matter was actually written in by her. The matter of him secretly eating osmanthus cake. So it was at that time that she was discovered, poem from beyond the heavens. What nameless scholar? It was clearly that annoying fellow. Mid-Autumn Festival, the matter on the night of the Mid-Autumn Festival, that fellow. She slowly flipped through the pages, and a smile appeared on her pretty face. These were all things that they had experienced together in the past. Now that she recalled it, those memories and feelings from that time would surge out from her mind. She murmured a few words. That annoying fellow, why is he everywhere? Even elder sister Ruoqing's diary. She lowered her head and continued to flip through the pages. As the pages turned, the smile on her face gradually froze and dissipated. Then, it became a little pale, and a deep sense of loss and confusion began to appear in her eyes. Wan Ruoqing walked into the courtyard and saw Xiao Chui sitting alone in the courtyard. She looked around and asked, "Xiao Chui, where is Zuinmo?" Xiao Chui was holding a triangular prism in her hand. After watching the sunlight pass through it, it became colorful. She was playing happily under the sun. Hearing Wan Ruoqing's voice, she put down the thing in her hand and stood up. She said, "Elder sister Ruoqing is back. Miss was here just now." She should have returned to her room now. She looked back and saw Sing Zuinmo walking out of a room. She walked over and said, "Miss, elder sister Ruoqing is back." Wan Ruoqing walked over and said with a smile, "The fish he sent yesterday is said to be a tribute from the palace. It's a river fish without many bones. He was worried that they wouldn't know how to cook it, so he told me how to cook it. It's been hot these days. Although it's frozen, it's better to eat it as soon as possible. Lee is so good to Mississippi. He sends fish every few days. The tribute from the palace is really much more delicious than the ones in the market. Xiao Chui said with a smile. Seeing Xiao Zhu holding her treasure and looking it up and down, she immediately trotted over and said anxiously, "This is a gift from Li." Xiao Zhu curled her lips and walked around the stone table with her. "So what if he gave it to you? Can't I play with it?" Xiao Chui said with dissatisfaction, "Li gave it to me first. I haven't let you play with it yet. You are robbing me." Xiao Zhu stopped and looked at her. "Are we still good sisters? Just let me play with it." Xiao Chui also stopped and hesitated. After a moment, she said, "Okay, but after you play with it, you have to give it back to me." Wan Ruoqing looked at the door of her room and then at her. She asked in confusion, "Why did you come out of my room?" Xing Zumo smiled and said, "I'm stupid. I forgot the needle technique you taught me yesterday, so I went in and looked at it again. It's okay. If you forget, I will teach you again. A woman only gets married once in her life. The wedding dress must be embroidered well. You can't be careless." She smiled and said, "Wait a moment. I will go to the room to get the needle and thread." Xing Zumo nodded and walked to the stone table in a daze. Beside her, Xiao Chui looked at Xiao Zhu who was playing with the prism under the sun. She couldn't help but laugh. "Stupid. You don't even know how to do such a simple thing. I will teach you." She looked at the two girls who were laughing and scolding each other, then looked at Wan Ruoqing who walked into the room. She felt that the wedding dress in her hand was a bit dazzling. Chapter 908. Sister Ruoqing's fish is so delicious. Xiao Chui put a mouthful of fish into her mouth and couldn't help but exclaim. Unlike her mistress, she didn't really like eating fish, but she always made an exception with Sister Ruoqing. If there was someone in this world who could cook as good as Li, it would definitely be Sister Ruoqing. Xiao Zhu pinched her face and said, "You're the one who can eat the most. You can have the leftovers later." Looking at the two girls playing, Wan Ruoqing smiled and turned to look at Xing Zumo, who was holding a pair of chopsticks in her hand and stupidly putting the fish into her mouth but not chewing. She asked in confusion, "Zumo, what's wrong? Is today's food not to your taste?" Xing Zumo came back to her senses and shook her head. "No, I just don't feel well." Wan Ruoqing put down her chopsticks and touched her forehead. She looked at her and shook her head. "It's not hot, but you don't look well. I'll go find a doctor." "No need, I'm just a bit tired. I'll be fine after eating and resting." Xing Zumo shook her head again and said, "Sister Ruoqing, I'm moving over soon. You should come with us." Wan Ruoqing shook her head and smiled. "I won't be going. Xiao Zhu and I will move back to Willow Lane. We've lived there for a long time and are used to it." Xing Zumo lowered her head and was silent for a while. She suddenly asked, "If I take away something you like very much, what will Sister Ruoqing do?" Wan Ruoqing was surprised. "What thing?" She looked into Wan Ruoqing's eyes and said in a low voice, "There's something that Sister Ruoqing likes very much. It's something that is very important to you. We both like it very much, but you liked it first." Wan Ruoqing smiled and put a piece of fish in her bowl. "Take it if you like it. I don't have anything that I like very much or that's very important to me. What if it's that piece of paper with the Immortal Magpie Bridge on it?" Wan Ruoqing paused in the middle of taking back her chopsticks. Soon, she smiled and nodded. "Sure, but I left it in the brothel. I'll bring it to you when I come back tonight." Under the dim candlelight, Wan Ruoqing spread out the yellowed paper. Some parts of the paper had already become tattered. She gently stroked the words on the paper with a faint smile on her face. She didn't know how much time had passed until the oil lamp lit up. She folded it again and walked out the door. She lowered her head and looked at the thing in her hand with some reluctance. Then she knocked on the door next door. The door opened very quickly, and Goddess Luo Shui walked out with sleepy eyes. She muttered, "Sister Ruoqing, it's already so late. Why aren't you sleeping?" Wan Ruoqing handed over the things in her hands. "This is for you." She rubbed her eyes, took it with both hands, and asked doubtfully, "What is it?" "The things you talked about during the day." She reached out to tidy up her messy hair and said, "It's late. Go back to sleep." Tsing Zumo pulled her arm. "I want you to talk to me." Before Wan Ruoqing could nod, she was dragged in and sat on the edge of the bed. Tsing Zumo hugged her arm and rested her head on her shoulder. She murmured, "I don't want to leave you. You're about to get married, but you're still so childish. Sister Ruoqing, I'm sorry." She suddenly raised her head and looked into Wan Ruoqing's eyes. "I stole your favorite thing." Wan Ruoqing shook her head and said, "It should have been yours in the first place." "What's mine is yours. What's mine is yours." After a moment of silence, Tsing Zumo suddenly smiled. She hugged her waist and said, "Hee, what I said today was all a lie. How could I steal something that my beloved sister Ruoqing likes? Don't you like my poetry book very much? I'll give it to you, huh?" Seeing her sudden change, Wan Ruoqing was dazed and looked at her with a confused expression. "What are you talking about?" She hugged Wan Ruoqing, and the two of them fell down together. "Sleep." Wan Ruoqing struggled to get up. "I'm going back to my room." She flipped over like a spoiled child and pressed Wan Ruoqing under her body. "No, I want to sleep with you in my arms tonight, and in the future. You're about to get married." "How can you? I don't care. I want in the future. I want forever." All right. If you say forever, then forever," Wan Ruoqing said helplessly. Then, her body stiffened. She blushed and whispered, "Sleep, sleep. Don't touch." Goddess Luo Shui grabbed her hand and put it on a soft spot on her body. She murmured, "Now we're even." Li looked at Mississippi Lu, who was behind him, helplessly and said, "Don't follow me. I've said it 10 times. When things in the capital are settled, I'll go with you." "Why are you in such a hurry?" Mississippi Lu asked lightly. "What else do you have to deal with?" "The Chui family. If the Chui family doesn't fall, how can we leave in peace? It's not like you don't know what happened a while ago. This kind of person is insane and has no bottom line. He can do anything. You don't want the people and things related to us in the capital to be targeted by the Chui family after we leave, right?" Mississippi Lu didn't ask him again this time. She turned around and walked outside. Li Yi was stunned for a moment and asked, "Where are you going?" Mississippi Lu replied lightly, "I'll help you." Li Yi grabbed Mississippi Lu's arm and pulled her back. He regretted telling her about it earlier. Fong stood not far away and watched the joke. Compared to Li Yi, who was having a headache, he was obviously in a much better mood. Recently, Fong could be said to be riding on the crest of success. When he spoke, his back was much straighter. Mrs. Fong and her sworn sister, Miss Xiao, had just come back from shopping. Fong was carrying a lot of bags of various sizes in his hands, but his face was full of bright smiles. Mississippi Lu stopped and asked, "Do you feel that Uncle Fong is different from before?" Li Yi was surprised and asked, "What's the difference?" Mississippi Lu thought for a moment and said, "In the past, when he was with Mrs. Fong, he always looked sad. Recently, he has been smiling more and more." Li Yi sighed and said, "People are in high spirits when they encounter happy events. Let him be happy. I just learned 2 words yesterday, and they seem to say that you can't be too happy." Mississippi Lu looked at him and said, "When things reach an extreme, they will go in the opposite direction. Extreme joy begets. What is it again? Extreme joy begets sorrow. Mississippi Lou glanced at him and said, "You don't need to remind me. I can also think of it." A strong man came from the front and greeted the two of them. "Young master," second Mississippi. Lee nodded and asked, "It's old Sue. Didn't you go to Ching and Mansion to pick up mother-in-law?" "Where is mother-in-law?" Old Sue sighed and said, "As soon as I came to the capital, I was dragged to the streets by my mother-in-law. I didn't bring any money with me, so I came back to get some." Lee waved his hand and said, "Go quickly. Remember to bring more." The strong man laughed and greeted the two people who were walking toward him. "Hello, sister-in-law. Hello, Miss Hong." After saying that, he realized that something was not quite right. His eyes stared straight at the young girl beside Mrs. Fong. Mrs. Fong looked at him and asked with a puzzled expression, "Do you know my sister?" "I don't know her." "Sister-in-law, you go ahead. I have something to do, so I'll go back first." Old Sue shook his head with a firm expression and strode forward. Mrs. Fong turned around, looked at him, and shouted, "Stop right there." Crash! The strong man stopped in his tracks. Fong's face turned pale, and the big and small bags in his hands fell to the ground. "What's wrong with him?" Mississippi Lou looked at Lee and asked in confusion. Lee pressed one hand on his forehead and sighed. He said, "He's too happy. Extreme joy begets sorrow." Chapter 909. "Tell me, do you know the younger sister of the Shao family?" Mrs. Fong looked at Old Sue and asked with an aggressive gaze. Old Sue secretly glanced at Fong. Cold sweat broke out on his forehead. He trembled and said, I. Mrs. Fong put her hands on her hips and said angrily, "You what? Tell me." Fong sighed. As soon as he took a step forward, he heard a sigh. The woman next to Mrs. Fong sighed and said, "Cousin, don't worry. I won't cause any trouble for your family. I'll go back in a few days." As soon as he finished speaking, everyone present was dumbfounded. Old Fong pursed his lips in confusion, while Old Sue stood rooted to the ground in a daze. Mrs. Fong was the first to react. She pointed at Old Sue and asked the woman, "Sister, is he the distant cousin you mentioned?" The woman nodded and said, "If it weren't for the disaster in my hometown, Mrs. Fong was already furious. She pointed at Old Sue and scolded, "You heartless man. You forgot your poor relatives when you got rich. Sister, you'll stay with us from now on. We won't trouble this heartless guy." No matter how stupid Old Sue was, he still reacted at this moment. He smiled apologetically and said, "Sister-in-law, what are you talking about? Didn't I go to Qing and Prefecture recently? I just missed Little Hong. Since I'm back, I naturally can't trouble you anymore." Mrs. Fong ignored her. She took her arm and said, "Let's go, sister. Ignore them. Let's go back and try on the new clothes." After saying that, she glanced at Fong and stopped in her tracks. She asked, "Why are you sweating so much?" Fong wiped the sweat off his forehead and looked up. He sighed and said, "The sun is so hot today. My eyes are sweating." Mississippi Lou looked away and said in surprise, "I've been in the village for so many years. Why haven't I heard that Old Sue has any distant cousins?" Lee glanced at her and said, "If he says he does, then he does. Why are you worrying about him?" Mississippi Lou turned to look at him. Her expression did not change, but her grip on her sword tightened. Lee touched his forehead. I have to think carefully. When are we going to the Wu Kingdom to visit my martial nephew?" Her chest heaved a few times, and a moment later, a forced smile appeared on her face. "I'm going to the League to train the newbies. I'll be back later." The reason why the martial arts practitioners who joined the Lu League improved so quickly was that there were many masters in the league. After accumulating enough points, they could exchange for pointers from these masters. Of course, if these masters were in a good mood, they would also train the newcomers for free. Mississippi Lou was obviously in a bad mood. Although she did not know the reason, the newcomers in the league must be careful. When he was about to go out, a servant of the Leaf family came to report that Lord Lou of the Ministry of Justice had come to visit. Lou Yi had been investigating an important case recently, and he must have made some progress. He gave up the idea of going out, poured 2 cups of tea, and sat down in the hall. Lord Li, after Lou Yi came in, he first cupped his hands and bowed to him. At Li Yi's signal, he sat across from him. Li Yi raised his teacup and asked, "Has there been progress on that case?" Lou Yi nodded. "I've had people follow Qin Yu for the past few days." Lord Li's guess is correct. There is indeed something wrong with the Qin family. What did you find out? Outside the capital, a manor owned by the Qin family under Qin Yan's name. There are some problems. Lou Yi's eyes were sharp. The manor is heavily guarded. Even the masters of the Secret Service can't sneak in. It doesn't look like a private garden for recreation at all. Usually, the people who enter and leave the manor are the nobles of the capital. The more it is so, the more suspicious it is. Li Yi was surprised. Even the masters of the Secret Service can't sneak in. Although there were no masters of the Grand Master level in the Secret Service, there were many guests who were only a step away from the Grand Master level. If even the masters of the Secret Service couldn't sneak in, it could be seen how heavily guarded the manor was. In the entire capital, perhaps only the Imperial Palace and the Department of Heavenly Punishment could compare. Lou Yi shook his head. He thought of something and said, "In the process of investigating Qin Yu, I discovered some suspicious points." What suspicious points? Lou Yi thought for a moment. "Lord Li, do you know that a few years ago, Qin Yu raped his own aunt and committed the crime of incest, causing the capital to denounce him?" Li Yi nodded. "I heard that the woman he raped couldn't bear the humiliation and committed suicide. Later on, the Qin family suppressed the matter. Even though Prime Minister Qin is the current Minister of the Right, he has no way of influencing the people. How could the Qin family suppress the matter?" Lou Yi shook his head and said, "In this matter, the Cui family used the power of the King of Shu and countless dignitaries in the capital to suppress this rebellious matter. Even the Empress in the palace contributed a lot." Li Yi knew that Lou Yi would not bring up this matter for no reason, so he waited for him to continue. "The woman he raped was named Lin Lian. Before entering the Qin family, she was a slightly famous actress in the capital. Later on, she caught the eye of Prime Minister Qin's 5th son, Qin He. Not long after he took her in as a concubine, that incident happened. Lin Lian is actually not the girl's real name. She was just a disciple of a performer with the surname Lin in the capital. She changed her surname after she became her master. That Lin Lian passed away a long time ago, and the disciples she took in her lifetime all had different experiences. That Miss Lin Lian is the oldest of her disciples and has inherited her acting skills. Her youngest disciple has completely inherited her skills in the art of the zither and has even surpassed her. She is extremely famous in the capital." Li Yi sighed and said, "Her youngest disciple, the girl with outstanding skills on the guqin, her stage name is Lin Shuangshuang, right?" Lou Yi nodded and said, "Yes, it is the deceased Lin Shuangshuang. Lin Qin, who reported to the Ministry of Justice, is also their sister. The common people only know that Chu Ping killed Lin Shuangshuang, but they have overlooked one thing. Lin Shuangshuang was already seriously ill. Even without that incident, she only had a few months to live." Lou Yi shook his head and said, "This is not all suspicious. Official Zhang said that there was no such thing as a criminal. This matter was originally a trap set up by the Cui family for the Chu family. The Chui family bribed Lin Shuangshuang in advance, but their original intention was not to use Lin Shuangshuang's death to threaten the Chu family. That night, someone saw the fifth master of the Qin family, Qin He, in a restaurant across from the Fine Sound Pavilion drunk. Official Zhang once said that when there are too many coincidences, it is no longer a coincidence. Li Yi shook his head and said, so this was not a trap set up by the Chui family for the Chu family. Lu Yi looked at him and nodded. This was a trap set up by someone for the Chui family and the Chu family. If the Chu family is crippled, the Chui family will lose an arm. Lu Yi put down his teacup and said, although Prime Minister Qin has not had much contact with the Chui family in this past year, the relationship between the two families cannot be severed. If something happens to the Qin family, the Chui family will really lose an arm. He raised his head and muttered, this fifth master Qin, what does he want to do? The Fong family. The wife of the Fong family and the girl walked into the house arm in arm. Fong came in carrying bags of various sizes. Close the door, the wife of the Fong family suddenly said. It's broad daylight, why close the door? Fong muttered. He put down the things in his hands and closed the door. The wife of the Fong family let go of the girl's hand and looked at the two of them. With a cold expression, she asked, when did you start? Chapter 9-10. Fong's face changed. He raised his head and opened his mouth, but he didn't say anything. When the woman heard this, her body trembled, and her face turned pale in an instant. She looked at Fong Lucier and said in panic, sister, don't. Fong Lucier waved her hand and said, don't call me that. I don't have a sister like you. Little Red's lips moved, but before she could say the next word, a mountain-like figure had already stood in front of her. Fong looked up at his wife and said in a low voice, it's all my idea. Blame me. Fong Lucier pointed her finger at him and said in a trembling voice, you really have an affair. Fong Lucier was stunned and looked at her in disbelief, you just tricked me. Well, you're really capable. Fong Lucier picked up the broom on the side and fiercely whipped him, you brought a fox spirit to our house, but you're still in the right, aren't you? Little Red's eyes were full of tears. She desperately stood in front of Fong and cried, sister, don't hit Fong Lucier. If you want to hit him, hit me. It's all my fault. I seduced him. Fong Lucier's broom didn't fall. She collapsed on the ground and cried, why is my life so bitter? I can't live like this anymore. Fong Lucier's face showed a painful expression. He scratched his hair hard and then loosened it powerlessly. Li Yi and Lu Yi walked out of the mansion. Lu Yi thought for a moment and said, after all, it's a serious matter. If we don't have enough evidence, we can't do anything. I'll ask them to keep an eye on it and try to get some useful clues. Don't bother. Li Yi waved to the sloppy old man not far away and said, Sue, I need your help with something. 10 drumsticks. The sloppy old man had recently understood that White Rabbit creamy candies was not a long-term solution. Under the influence of his second granduncle, he had a special liking for drumsticks. This was not the only thing he had learned from his second granduncle. Yesterday, he had even asked Li Yi to make him a rocking chair that was exactly the same as his second granduncle's. Li Yi nodded. Deal. It was just cooking once. Xiao Huan's body was still growing during this period of time. She should eat more good food to nourish herself. After 2 years, it would be difficult to nourish herself again. The sloppy old man glanced at Louis Chang. What are you waiting for? Let's go. Lu Yi looked at him. Li Yi waved his hand and said, if there's anything, tell Sue. You guys just have to wait for the news. Grandmasters could be said to be the pinnacle of martial artists. Ordinary martial artists could only be found but not sought after. Using them to gather information was definitely a waste of their talents. After sending them off, when he was about to walk back, he saw a figure squatting in the corner with his head buried between his knees. There was no sound at all. Li Yi looked around, walked over, and asked in confusion, "What's wrong now? Didn't you make it clear just now?" Fong raised his head and said in a hoarse voice, "Xiao Hong is gone." Li Yi was stunned. He looked at him and asked tentatively, "Your wife knows?" Fong nodded. Li Yi squatted down beside him and wanted to say some comforting words. When the words were about to come out, they only turned into a sigh. "Don't be anxious about this kind of thing. Let's take it slow." Fong raised his head and looked at him with burning eyes. He asked, "Young master, am I too much of a jerk?" After that, he lowered his head and shook his head. "No, I shouldn't ask you this question." The problem that Fong encountered could only be solved by himself. No one else could help or intervene. Li Yi's own affairs were even more complicated. They needed to be done step by step and could not be rushed. "Beast, he's a beast." The sloppy old man came in from outside angrily. Li Yi was worried that he would get angry and tear down the house. He hurriedly stood up and asked, "What happened?" The sloppy old man was still angry. "That place is a devil's den. I've lived for a long time, but I've never seen such a crazy person. The owner of that place should be killed by 1,000 cuts. If it weren't for Lu's repeated orders yesterday, I would have massacred that devil's den." Lu Yi followed behind and said in a low voice, "Your Excellency, it's almost certain that those missing women are related to the Qin family. The previous Ping family should have set up a trap for Chu Ping. That place is the root of evil." Li Yi looked at him. "That place and the Ping family," Lu Yi gritted his teeth. "It's the same place. I've already sent people to the Secret Intelligence Office to send more people. There's no time to lose. We need to act immediately." Lu Yi said a few words in a hurry. Someone from the Secret Intelligence Office came to report and left in a hurry. After the sloppy old man sat down, he gulped down a few mouthfuls of tea and recounted everything he had seen last night. The women tied up in the room were obviously different from the prostitutes outside. They no longer knew how to resist. Their eyes were empty and vacant, and they could only be manipulated. When the sloppy old man said this, he crushed 3 cups and smashed a wooden table. Li Yi had taken away the precious purple clay teapot in time to avoid this disaster. He shook his head and said, "The Secret Intelligence Office has already mobilized all their forces. Calm down and wait for the news." As soon as he finished speaking, Fong walked in from outside in a daze. He looked at Li Yi and said in a daze, "Young master, Little Red is missing." Li Yi said in surprise, "Missing? She didn't return to the Jade Courtyard." Fong shook his head and said, "No, I asked the madam. She said that Little Red hasn't returned since she left last time." Li Yi thought for a moment and asked again, "What about Drunken Ink?" Fong looked anxious. "I went there too. Little Chui said she didn't go there either. She didn't go back last night. She didn't bring any money with her. She doesn't know anyone in the capital. Where could she go? Don't worry." Li Yi said as he walked out of the door, "Think about it first. Where else could she have gone? I'll ask the brothel and the government to inquire about the news." Outside the door, Fong Liusher's face was pale and her expression was extremely remorseful. Seeing Fong come out, she went to greet him and wanted to say something. But Fong just glanced at her and left in a hurry. In the Qin family, Qin Yan looked at his son who walked in from outside and asked with a sullen face, "You didn't return last night. What did you do?" "I went to find a friend to drink." "Qin, you look drunk." He shook his head and said, "If there's nothing else, I'll go back to my room first. I'm sleepy, bastard, this bastard." Qin Yan looked at his swaying back and forth as he left. He waved his hand and shook his head helplessly. Has everything been taken care of? Passing through a moon door, Qin Yu's drunkenness disappeared and he asked in a low voice. The person beside him immediately said, "Little Duke, don't worry. The person has been moved. This time, they'll definitely come empty-handed." A bunch of idiots. Qin Yu twitched the corner of his mouth and then a trace of coldness appeared on his face. He murmured, "Li Yi, County Marquis Li, Dr. Li. I'll see how long you can be proud for." The coldness flashed across his face and he asked again, "That woman last night?" The person nodded repeatedly. "She's been sent to your room." Qin Yu didn't speak again. He walked to the door and pushed it open. Seeing the empty room, his face instantly darkened. Where is she? Chapter 9-11. Little Red had disappeared. Not only had Li Yi made arrangements for the brothel, but he had also informed the county government and even the secret intelligence office. They had already acted quickly. All they could do now was wait. There was no news, but Lu Yi soon came. "There's a traitor in the secret intelligence office." Lu Yi's face was as calm as still water. He said slowly, "When we brought people there were no traces left. There were only a few servants of the Qin family, but they had something on them. After all, that was the house of an important official in the court. It's a bit troublesome." Li Yi looked at him and asked, "You didn't find any clues at all?" Lu Yi shook his head. "One night is enough for them to move the people away. Other clues are not enough to be used as evidence. There are people watching the surroundings, and there are no suspicious people coming in or out. There should be a secret passage inside, but we have no reason to search it now." "What about the traitor?" Li Yi asked. "He committed suicide." Lu Yi shook his head and said, "That person has been in the secret intelligence office for nearly 20 years. When we found him, he bit the poison sac and didn't say a word." "I see." Li Yi nodded and asked again, "Do you know which family the carriages that go in and out usually belong to?" "There are records of them." Lu Yi replied, then raised his head and said, "But sir, with just these, I'm afraid it's difficult to form evidence. Moreover, those people are all nobles in the capital, and their status is extraordinary." Li Yi waved his hand. "These are enough." The secret intelligence office had a special status in the court, but it was still troublesome to encounter such things. Lu Yi would have a headache later. Breaking into a private house was not a big deal in other places, but this was the capital, and everything had to be done according to the law. Moreover, the court had changed the law not long ago against the opposition of countless nobles. If the court protected the secret intelligence office breaking into an official's house, it would undoubtedly be contradictory. It would give those people a reason, and maybe something more serious would happen. To be honest, even Li Yi himself didn't expect that they could plant people in the secret intelligence office. He had to admit that he had underestimated the Cui family. This time, Lu Yi had returned without any results. They would definitely be more careful and even stop all actions. If they wanted to collect evidence through normal channels, it would be very difficult. Crack. In the end, Li Yi did not manage to keep the teapot. "You didn't find him." The sloppy old man slammed his palm on the new table, causing it to shatter. The teapot on top of it also fell to the ground and broke into several pieces. "Are they messing with me?" The anger on the sloppy old man's face didn't last long. He quickly revealed a smile, stroked his beard, and muttered, "Interesting, interesting. How many years has it been since I've encountered something so interesting?" The smile on his face was like that of a benevolent elder, but the servant girl who came in to clean up the mess couldn't help but shiver. She felt her body was a little cold, and her hands moved a little faster. "Cui family." Cui Qingming sighed and said, "What a pity. In the past 20 years, there was only one spy left in the secret intelligence office. Now, there's no one left. Someone beside him comforted. Second brother, there's no need to sigh. As the saying goes, there's no gain without loss. Although we've lost that spy, the Secret Intelligence Office recklessly intruded into an official's residence. This is not a small crime. The Imperial Court has reformed the law, and it can't be overturned. With Liu Yi around, the Ministry of Justice is almost unable to interfere. If we get rid of him, it will be much more convenient to do things in the future. Cui Qingming nodded and said, let them be prepared. This time, if we don't pull Liu Yi down completely, we won't rest. The Cui clan hated Liu Yi to the bone. At that time, it was precisely because of Liu Yi's meddling that caused all their arrangements and deployments towards the Chu clan to turn into ash. The Chu clan had fallen, and the Cui clan had lost an arm. If this matter were to implicate the Qin clan and those people, then they would really arrive at the end of their rope. At this point, they almost understood that it was unlikely for His Majesty to summon the King of Shu back. But if the status quo was maintained, it might not be a bad thing for them. Once His Majesty passed away, who was more suitable than the King of Shu in terms of identity and status when the position of the Eastern Palace was vacant? If it really came to that, it would be much easier for them to do things. Cui Qingming showed a sarcastic smile and said, I really want to see with my own eyes what expression County Marquis Li has now. Li Yi was naturally anxious, but it was not because of the Secret Intelligence Office. As long as he knew the facts, the evidence was not important. What he was worried about was that if something really happened to Little Red, Old Fong's family would be ruined. However, the brothel and the government were not omnipotent. Even if they were to find clues, it would take time. Instead of searching around like a headless fly, it was better to wait here. Some people of the Cui family were also anxious. Little Duke, I've asked the front and back doors, and no strange woman came in or out. That woman must be hiding somewhere in the mansion. If you look hard, you can definitely find her. Qin Yu glanced at him coldly and said, go and look for her. Go and look for her in every room in the mansion. The servant was stunned and asked again, go and look for her in every room. Prime Minister and the masters, Qin Yu kicked him and said, except for those few, don't let anyone go. In a remote and messy woodshed in Qin's mansion, a woman looked at the figure covered in a black cloak and said gratefully, thank you for saving me, my benefactor. Little Red, why are you here? A hoarse voice came from the black cloak, and it was not difficult to tell that it was a woman's voice. I was caught by them, the woman replied. Then she realized something and asked in shock, how do you know my name is Little Red? The person in the black cloak put down the hood of her cloak. It was an ordinary-looking woman, but there was a long scar on her face, which looked a little scary. The woman looked at her and said, I went down the mountain with Uncle Fong and saw you on the road. Little Red's expression was a little excited. She grabbed her sleeve and asked, you know Big Brother Fong? The woman with the long scar on her face did not answer this question. Instead, she looked at her and said, this place is very remote. They can't find this place. You hide here first. I'll think of a way to spread the news. As soon as she finished speaking, there was a sudden urgent knock on the door. The woman's expression changed. She hurriedly let Little Red hide in a large vat and threw her black cloak inside. She carried a bundle of firewood and walked to the door. She asked, who is it? The firewood is not ready yet. Wait a moment, a rough voice came from outside the door, open the door. The community sends warmth. Chapter 9:12. Hearing the voice outside, the woman with the scar on her face calmed down a bit and asked, Wu, Brother Wu. It's me, Xiao Mei. Open the door. There's not enough time. Wu Er's voice came from outside. Liu Mei opened the door and looked at the man outside. She asked in confusion, "What's not enough time?" "There's not enough time to explain." Wu closed the door and said, "Hurry and call the girl out. Those people are coming." As soon as he finished speaking, the sound of messy footsteps could be heard. Lu Mei's expression changed greatly. Wu closed the door and grabbed her arm. He said in a low voice, "Let's go. I'll tell you in detail later." Search. A group of Qin family guards kicked open the door of the woodshed and searched inside and out. They also looked at the woodpile, water tanks, and other places where people could hide, but they didn't find anything. The leader waved his hand and said, "Search other places." Qin Manor, back residence. Wu led the two of them through the narrow path between the rock garden and the wall. Lu Mei hesitated for a moment and finally couldn't help but ask, "Brother Wu, how did you know? Now is not the time to talk about this." Wu quickly said, "They are searching the entire Qin Manor. It's not safe to hide there. I'll take you to a safe place." Xiao Hong followed and said in a weak voice, "Thank you, big brother. No need to thank me." Wu smiled and said, "If you want to thank someone, thank Fifth Lord. Otherwise, such a beautiful girl would have been defiled by that beast Qin Yu again." The three of them were in a deserted garden in the Qin family. The weeds were as tall as a person and they followed the narrow path between the rock garden. They didn't encounter anyone along the way. Somewhere, Wu pushed open a small door. After the three of them walked in and closed it from the inside, he let out a sigh of relief and said with a smile, "Okay, we're safe now." The small door was clearly the back door of a house. Wu took the two of them to the front yard. A middle-aged man was already standing there waiting. Wu walked over and said with a smile, "Fifth Lord, I've brought the girl." Fifth Lord nodded and looked at the girl. "I'm afraid it's not easy to send you out from here. Do you have any family in the capital?" Xiao Hong thought for a moment and was about to speak. She paused and said after a long time, "Just tell the Madam of Jade Courtyard that I'm here and she will know what to do." Fifth Lord shook his head and said, "If that's all, I'm afraid it won't work. Miss doesn't know where this place is. Open the door, open the door." Suddenly, the sound of knocking came from outside the courtyard. The knocking was so forceful that it seemed like the entire door was going to crack. Qin Clan's fifth master glanced at Wu who immediately understood. He walked over and whispered, "Follow me." The fifth master of the Qin family walked to the door and opened it. He asked, "Why did you use so much force?" Fifth Lord, the head guard, first casually greeted him and said, "A servant girl in the mansion ran away, and now the whole mansion is being searched. Of course, we are not suspecting Fifth Lord, but just doing a routine search." "Fifth Lord, you don't mind, right?" The fifth master of the Qin family waved his hand and said, "Go ahead. Be careful and don't break anything." They swaggered in. The fifth master of the Qin family stood in the yard and watched them rummaging in the yard. When they went back into the house, he hurriedly followed them and said, "Be careful. If you break anything, you can't afford to pay for it." They didn't dare to be too arrogant. After searching for a while, the leader knocked on a wall on the inside and pushed it hard. He asked, "There won't be a secret door here, right?" Fifth Master Qin smiled. "How could it be?" Unable to find anything here, the guard waved his hand. "Let's go to the next place." Fifth Master Qin followed them out. After closing the door, he walked back. He knocked on the wall that the guard had pushed 3 times, paused for a moment, and then hurriedly knocked 3 more times. A moment later, a heavy sound came from behind the wall, and the wall slowly turned to an angle. Wu came out from behind the wall, wiped the sweat from his forehead, and complained, "Fifth Master, this wall really needs to be repaired. It's so hard to switch it on and off." Fifth Master Qin waved his hand and said, "Sit down and rest for a while." Wu-er sat down at the table, picked up a teapot, and gulped down a mouthful of tea. Then he asked, "Fifth Master, we saved Miss Hong. What should we do now? It's impossible for us to send her out alone." Fifth Master Qin shook his head, looked at him, and said, "Go find this girl's family and report it to the authorities." Ah! Wu-er was stunned and said, "Report to the authorities. But Fifth Master, this is the Qin family. We should have a bottom line." Fifth Master Qin looked at him, shook his head, and said, "What's right is right, and what's wrong is wrong. This has nothing to do with whether I'm a member of the Qin family or not. Fifth Master, you." Wu-er stood up with a solemn expression. He bowed to him and said, "You're really a good person." "It's just for justice." Wu-er nodded and asked, "Which official should I report to? The capital magistrate or the capital governor?" Fifth Master Qin looked at him, smiled, and said, "Report whichever one you like. I believe you know what to do." Wu-er patted his chest and said, "Don't worry, Fifth Master. I won't let you down." Wu-er strode out. Fifth Master Qin looked at the two of them and said, "I'm afraid you'll have to suffer for a while." The two women thanked him repeatedly. Fifth Master Qin looked behind him and saw that the gambling wall was still tilted. He walked over and shook his head, saying, "This Wu-er is always careless and forgets to close it again." He stretched out a hand and closed the wall until it was seamless. Then he walked over, looked at the two women, smiled, and said, "It's still early. What do you want to drink, tea or something else? The county government or the prefecture government?" On a street somewhere in the capital, Wu-er looked up, murmured, and stepped into a mansion. He said to the guard at the door, "Find Lord Li, in the courtyard of the Li mansion." Fong Lucia looked at Fong with a regretful expression. "It's all my fault. If it weren't for me, she wouldn't have left." Fong squatted on the ground, sighed, and shook his head, saying, "It's not your fault. It's all my fault. I shouldn't have hidden it from you." Fong Lucia lowered her head and said, If she can come back, you can do whatever you want." If he had heard this earlier, he would have been extremely excited, but at this moment, he couldn't bring himself to think about it at all. "Hey, Fong, long time no see." A figure came in from outside and looked at Fong. He first greeted him with a smile, and then asked, "Is Lord Li here?" Fong waved his hand and said in a hoarse voice, "Inside." Hearing the voice outside, Li Yi had already come out. When he saw Wu-er, he asked in surprise, "Why are you here?" "I'm here to report a case." Wu-er touched his head and said with a smile, "Qin, you took a girl back. Fifth Master and I secretly saved her. We couldn't send her out, so Fifth Master asked me to come out and report the case." "Took a girl?" "Yes." Wu-er nodded and said, "This time the evidence is conclusive. He can't run away. But we still have to go to the Jade Courtyard. The girl said that only the Madam of the Jade Courtyard can report the case." "The Madam of the Jade Courtyard." Fong's body trembled. He suddenly got up and ran over quickly. He grabbed Wu-er's arm and asked, "What's the name of the girl you mentioned?" Wu-er scratched his head. I think her name is Xiaohong." The tight string in Fong's heart finally loosened, and he slumped to the ground. When Fong Lucia hurried to help him, he seemed to remember something and asked, "What did you say just now?" "If Xiaohong can come back." Fong Lucia looked puzzled. "What did I say just now?" Chapter 9:13. Yesterday, the Secret Intelligence Division broke into an official's residence. Today, there were many impeachment memorials. This organization had always had a mixed reputation. At a critical moment, there was no lack of people hitting someone when they were down. The court was in turmoil. Even if there were clues, they couldn't break into the minister's residence again. After the capital's magistrate, Lu Dayo, received the report from the Madam of the Jade Courtyard. He considered the special nature of this case and asked the princess as quickly as possible. After receiving the order to search the Qin manor, he rushed over with the bailiffs of the county yamen. Among the many bailiffs, the person leading them was a burly man. His face was filled with anxiety as he urged the bailiffs to hurry up. Li Manor. Wu Er scratched his head and said to Li Yi, "My lord, if there's nothing else, I'll be going back first." Li Yi thought for a moment, looked at him and asked, "How did Qin he know that Qin you captured a girl and brought her into the manor?" "I don't know either." Wu Er shook his head and said, "Fifth Lord only told me to save Xiaomei and that girl. I don't know how Fifth Lord found out about this." Li Yi thought for a moment and said, "I'm afraid he already knows about you. You don't need to go back. Haven't you always wanted to go to the Lumang? You can go there now." Wu Er smiled and said, "There's no hurry. I still want to go back. Maybe I can be of some use." Li Yi hesitated for a moment and nodded. "Next, there may be some unrest in the Qin family. Be careful." "I know." Wu Er nodded. "I'll be going back first." In front of the Qin manor, Lu Dio politely bowed to Qin Yan and said, "This is an important matter. This official has already asked the princess. Please cooperate, milord Qin." Qin Yan's expression was unsightly as he questioned, "Yesterday, the Secret Intelligence Division barged into the Qin residence, but Lord Lu actually brought bailiffs here today to arrest people. What kind of place do you think the Qin residence is? Is it a place that you can enter and search as you please?" The expression on Lu Dio's face was very polite. He said again, "There are witnesses who saw that after the young lady was kidnapped, she entered the backyard of Qin Manor. It's not that I don't believe you, Lord Qin, but this case is really too important. It's also related to another big case that even His Majesty is very concerned about. I really have no choice but to do this. Let them search." Qin Yan wanted to say something else, but an elderly voice came from behind him. Qin Xiang waved his hand. There was no joy or anger on his face. Since it wasn't done by the Qin family, what harm is there in searching? But, if we let them enter, where would the face of my Qin family be? He retorted. Seeing that Qin Xiang's face was still expressionless, he gloomily looked at Lu Dio and said, "Lord Lu, this official can let you in. If you can find that woman in my Qin residence today, I, Qin Yan, have nothing to say. If you can't find her, then tomorrow in court, Lord Lu will have already prepared an excuse." "Thank you, Lord Qin." Lu Dio cupped his hands and turned his head to order, "This is the Qin residence. You can search, but do not act rashly." Under the lead of the large man, more than 10 bailiffs filed in. Trash, how could there not be? Could it be that she can grow wings and fly out of the residence? Qin Yu's face was gloomy as he coldly asked. A Qin family servant shivered and said, "Little High Duke, other than the Prime Minister's room, we've already searched the entire Qin residence, inside and out. We really haven't found that woman. It's possible that she really has escaped." Escaped? What do you think this Qin residence is? Qin Yu suddenly threw the teacup over. The servant let the teacup hit his head and didn't dare to dodge. He didn't even dare to wipe the blood that flowed down. At this time, another person ran in from outside in a panic and said in panic, "Little High Duke, it's bad. The government has come to the Qin residence to search. They said that we've captured a woman." Qin Yu coldly glanced at that person. "When you captured her yesterday, did someone see you?" That person's expression changed. No. Qin Yu thought for a moment, waved his hand, and said, "If they want to search, then let them search." The Qin family servant raised his head and asked carefully, "Little High Duke, what if they really find her?" Qin Yu looked at him coldly. "If they really find her, I'll chop you up and feed you to the dogs." Wu Er hurriedly walked into the room and said, Fifth Master, the capital magistrate has brought people over. Fifth Master Qin glanced at him and asked, "Why are you back?" Wu Er said in surprise, "I came back after reporting to the government." "Where else can I go?" Fifth Master Qin's gaze stayed on his face for a moment and said, "Forget it, it's not important. The two girls have gone out from the back door. The county government's bailiffs will find them." He clasped his hands behind his back and walked out of the courtyard. Wu Er asked in surprise, "Fifth Master, where are you going?" "Going out for a walk." Fifth Master Qin didn't look back but waved his hand behind him. "I'll walk alone. You don't have to follow me this time." Wu Er stopped. After touching his head, he nodded and said, "Okay." The bailiffs searched carefully in Qin's mansion. They were very patient in the face of some uncooperative people. After all, this was Qin's mansion. Even if Lord Lu didn't specifically instruct them, they didn't dare to act rashly. However, many servants of Qin's mansion looked at them from a distance, pointing at the group of people and talking. Wu Er walked over leisurely with his hands behind his back. He pointed at the bailiffs and said, "This is the yard of the second master. How can there be people hiding here? Be careful. Don't break anything. You can't afford to pay for it." The leading man's face darkened. He pointed in a direction and said, "Go over there and find them." "Over there? That's the residence of the third master. The third master is a fifth-level official in the imperial court. He's very honest. It's impossible for him to hide people. Go over there, that's the residence of the servants. You can go if you want. Anyway, I don't think it's a good place to hide people." The leading man looked back at him and asked, "Then where do you think it's a good place to hide people?" Wu Er shook his head and glanced in a certain direction. "Then how do I know?" The leading man pointed at that place and asked, "What's that place?" "That place." Wu Er glanced at it and shook his head. "I don't know." After saying that, he walked away leisurely. The leading man suddenly waved his hand and pointed in that direction. "Search." In a deserted garden in the backyard of Qin's mansion, the bailiffs found two women behind a rockery. When one of the women saw the man dressed as a bailiff, her face lit up with joy. She took 2 quick steps forward and then stopped. She knelt on the ground and said in a loud voice, "Your Excellency, you must seek justice for me." Seeing this scene, the expressions of the people of Qin's family who followed them changed greatly. Some people in the distance looked even more frightened. They had searched this place many times just now. There was no one at all. "Little Duke, it's bad. They found the woman in the backyard." A servant of Qin's family rushed into Qin Yu's residence and said in a panic. Qin Yu clenched his fists and his face was extremely gloomy. The servant said anxiously, "Little Duke, it's better to hide first. You won't be able to leave in a while." Qin Yu looked outside, loosened his clenched fists, and turned into the backyard. In the capital, when night gradually fell, a dry well in the courtyard of a house 2 streets away from Qin's mansion suddenly lit up with a faint light. The rope tied to a tree outside the well swayed for a long time before a figure climbed out of the well with difficulty. He looked back at the well and said in a low voice, "Hurry up. Take advantage of the darkness to go to the Chui family." In the courtyard, a figure who had been sitting for a long time sighed. "Why did you come so late?" "I've been waiting for you for a long time." Qin Yu suddenly turned his head. "Who is it?" He only saw a vague figure in the darkness and suddenly felt a pain in his neck. His whole body weakly fell to the ground. Chapter 9:14. Qin Manor. All of the Qin family's servants temporarily stopped what they were doing. They were absent-minded and would occasionally look in a certain direction in the manor. In a very spacious hall, Qin Xiang looked at the young woman in the hall and said in a deep voice, "Where is he?" A servant of the Qin manor walked in from outside and said respectfully, replying to the Prime Minister, "The young Duke is not in the room." Lu Diao bowed to Prime Minister Qin and turned to look at Qin Yan. He cupped his hands and said, "Sir Qin, this young Duke Qin forcefully kidnapped a civilian girl." Qin Yan's face was gloomy and he said coldly, "Sir Lu, you should be careful with your words. Although our court does not use words to convict people, before the matter is clear, it is best not to speak carelessly." After Qin Yan finished speaking, he looked at the woman and asked with a gloomy expression, "You said that you were kidnapped and sent here?" The man who looked like a bailiff frowned and took half a step forward, but he was stopped by Lu Diao. The woman nodded and said, "Yes." Qin Yan asked again, "Then how did you escape the room?" The woman opened her mouth, but before she could say anything, a silhouette stepped out from behind her. The woman with a scar on her face stared straight at Qin Yan as she spoke. "I heard this young lady calling for help in her room, so I secretly let her out." Qin Yan frowned. You what you? The man finally couldn't take it anymore. He took a step forward and said, "The witness and material evidence are conclusive. Do you still want to deny it?" "You are." Just as Qin Yan's anger rose, he was interrupted by Lu Diao. County Magistrate Lu smiled and said, "The country has its laws. The young duke forcefully kidnapped a civilian girl. This is an established fact. Her Highness the Princess has ordered this case to be investigated strictly. I hope that Sir Qin will not hide the information about the young duke." Qin Yan impatiently shook his head. "I don't know where he is. This official is just reminding you." County Magistrate Lu smiled and respectfully bowed to Prime Minister Qin before saying, "Let's go, wait a moment." Qin Yan stretched out his hand and pointed at the woman with a scar on her face. He said, "She's a maidservant of my Qin clan. Lord Lu, are you taking her away as well?" Lu Diao shook his head and said, "What are you talking about, Mr. Qin? This girl is the key to this case. Of course, we have to take her with us." Qin Yan glared fiercely at the woman, but in the end, he didn't make any further movements to stop her. Qin Xiang held his forehead and leaned back in his chair. He closed his eyes and muttered, "This bastard, this bastard." Qin Yan clenched his fists and walked to the door. He looked at a servant of the Qin clan and asked in a low voice, "Where is that unfilial son?" The man said in a low voice, "They left through the secret passage." Qin Yan lowered his voice and said, "Tell him to stay outside during this period of time. Don't come back." Although similar cases had occurred in the past, times had changed. The new system of the imperial court had just been established, and it was time for them to enforce the law. If they were caught, the punishment would not be light. In the distance, he saw a person walk over. With a dark expression, he asked, "Where did you go this time?" The Qin clan's fifth master, who reeked of alcohol and his clothes in disarray, cut a sorry figure, walked over. He looked around and asked, "Just now, I saw an official leave. Did something happen?" As he spoke, the smell of alcohol filled the air. Qin Yan took a step back in disgust and asked, "How did you end up like this again? You've lost all the face of the Qin clan." The Qin clan's fifth master waved his hand and said, "On the way back, I met a mad dog. As a member of the Qin clan, I obviously couldn't allow it to randomly bite me. Wouldn't that be losing face for the Qin clan? So, I broke its 5 legs and broke its teeth." Nonsense. Qin Yan waved his hand in extreme disgust. "Someone, bring him back to the room." A sturdy figure hurriedly ran over and supported the Qin clan's fifth master with practiced ease. As they walked back, he said in a small voice, "Fifth master is really drunk. How can a dog have 5 legs? The Qin clan's fifth master shook his head and countered, "You have 3 legs, why can't a dog have 5? It's all my fault. I've wronged you, it's not big sister's fault. I was careless, you're still willing to call me sister?" I'm the one who doesn't deserve to be your sister." After apologizing to each other, the two women hugged each other and cried. Fong, on the other hand, was full of smiles. His smile was so wide that it almost reached his eyebrows. Li looked at the back corner. The lady who had not raised her head since she walked in, pulled Xiao Huan's sleeve, signaling to her. The servant girl immediately understood. She slowly walked over and looked at the woman with a scar on her face. She pulled the woman's hand and whispered, "Sister Lu Mei, come in. The eldest miss and the second miss are inside, son-in-law, of course I know this." Fong patted his chest and said, "Even though Lu Lao-san is not a good person, I am indebted to Xiao Mei. In the future, I will treat her as my daughter." Li shook his head and said, "You treat her as your daughter. She treats Xiao Hong as her sister. You treat Xiao Hong as, you are the one who is not a good person." Fong ran away with a red face. Lu Dio walked over and shook his head, saying, "Master Li, Qin Yu ran away. I'm afraid it won't be easy to catch him. Kidnapping a commoner girl is not a small matter, but it's not a big matter either. Moreover, it didn't lead to a tragedy. I'm afraid the Qin family won't be touched." "Who said I was going to touch the Qin family?" Li shook his head and looked at Fong, who was being lovingly beaten by Fong's wife. He said, "It's good that he's fine. As for the other things, we can take it slow." "What do you mean by it's not a big matter, but it's not a small matter?" The sloppy old man frowned, looked at Lu Dio, and asked, "Do you know what that place looks like? What that bastard committed was more than just kidnapping a commoner girl. If he hadn't run fast, this old man would have let him see all kinds of strange martial arts in this world, so that his life wouldn't have been in vain." The sloppy old man was very excited and angry. Li Yi could understand. This time, he was really made a fool of. If he couldn't get back at them, he was afraid that it would be difficult to untie the knot in his heart. Maybe even his heart of martial arts would be affected. Li Yi looked at him and said, "Su, don't be excited. Don't worry, I promise to find out this matter soon. When the time comes, I will let you do it yourself. Those who should be punished will not be spared." A worried look appeared on County Magistrate Lu's face. He said, "With such a thing happening to the Qin family, I'm afraid that very few people will impeach Lu Yi. It's best to let him investigate this matter. However, last time, we alerted the enemy. I'm afraid it won't be easy to investigate again." Li Yi shook his head and said, "In the morning assembly tomorrow, Lord Lu will impeach Lu Yi in front of all the officials. He used his identity as a spy to break into an official's house and was lawless." Ah! County Magistrate Lu was stunned and couldn't believe his ears. "Forget it, your identity is not suitable." Li Yi thought for a moment, then shook his head and said, "Let's change it to Lord Xing. When Lord Lu goes back, please go to the capital governor's mansion." County Magistrate Lu thought for a moment and asked doubtfully, "Lord Li, forgive this lowly official for being slow-witted. But why do we impeach Lu Yi? Lord Lu is very careful. After Lord Xing impeaches Lu Yi." Li Yi looked at Lu Dio and said, "Lord Lu, please write down the names of those who follow the trend." Chapter 9:15. Lu Dio gazed at Li Yi in a daze for a long time. Only then did he raise his hands in a somewhat ashamed gesture and say, "Sir is wise." The actions of the county government were completely unconcealed. The matter of the Duke of Qin forcefully abducting a woman and fleeing to escape punishment quickly spread throughout Jingdo. This was not the first time the Duke had done such a despicable thing. He had done many more shameless things before, but by relying on his powerful background, he was able to settle them all. However, that was then and this was now. Recently, it was a special time. Let alone the Duke, even if it was a prince committing a crime, it had to be tried according to the rules. Otherwise, the court, which had just reformed the law, would be slapping itself in the face. Countless people were waiting to see them make a fool of themselves. Of course, no law could be changed overnight. Perhaps the Qin family would be condemned by public opinion, but it would not be able to harm their foundation. Although the people were helpless, they could only accept this reality. The Cui family. Qin Yan gazed at Cui Qingming with a face full of surprise and asked, "He hasn't come to the Cui family?" Cui Qingming shook his head and said, "Earlier, he only sent someone to tell me about the secret intelligence office. He didn't come tonight." He then shook his head and said, "Today is different from the past. He really should be more careful. If he is caught by the government, it will be troublesome. After this incident, I will let him stay at home peacefully for a period of time. When His Highness the King of Shu returns, everything will be settled." Qin Yan sighed and said, "I'll go to the other families to see. If this unfilial son isn't in the Cui family, where can he hide?" After Qin Yan left, a person walked up to Cui Qingming and said in a small voice, "The matter of Qin Yu is only a small matter. Its influence is limited. I'm just afraid that once they catch Qin Yu and dig out some other things from his mouth, things will be very bad." Cui Qingming thought about it and waved his hand. "Even if they really dig it out, what can they do? If they really have the guts to dig it out, there's no harm in helping them." The middle-aged man beside him paused and seemed to realize something. He then smiled and said, "Second brother is right. Even if they have the guts, they don't have the strength." Late at night, Qin Yan dragged his tired body back to the Qin manor. His expression was dark as he muttered to himself, "Just where did this unfilial son go?" It was rare for Li Yi to wake up early today. In fact, there would always be 1 or 2 days a month when he had to wake up early. Not only was he tortured by Li Duan, but Mississippi Lu had also pestered him to study with her until midnight last night. He was severely lacking in sleep. Before the old emperor arrived, he wanted to lean against a pillar and take a nap. However, a fly kept buzzing in his ears, and he couldn't chase it away no matter how hard he tried. Li Xian frowned and said, "What's going on with Lu Yi? Isn't he usually very cautious? Why is he so reckless this time? When I came over just now, I heard a lot of people talking about him in front of His Majesty." Li Yi struggled to open his eyes and said weakly, "Fine. Don't talk. The court is about to begin. Let me sleep for a while." Li Xian looked at him and asked in surprise, "What's wrong with you? Why do you look so listless?" Li Yi glanced at him and said, "If you had an energetic wife or sister, she wouldn't be much better than me." The surprise on Li Xian's face turned into shock. He asked in a low voice, "You've already taken her down?" Before Li Yi could understand what he was saying, a eunuch announced in a sharp voice that His Majesty had arrived. When the old emperor went to court, he needed 2 eunuchs to support him. The eldest princess sat on the lower right side of the emperor. The officials greeted her one after another. "My ministers, what important matter do you have to report to me today?" He looked down at the people below. His voice was still calm, but it didn't have the same imposing manner as before. In the main hall, Cui Qingming met the eyes of several people and nodded slightly. One of them was about to step forward, but someone else in front of him stepped forward before him. Cui Qingming's eyes narrowed as he looked at the figure in front of the hall. The capital governor, Qing Shichen, bowed and said, "Your Majesty, I accuse the Assistant Minister of Justice, Lu Yi. Relying on Your Majesty's favor, he disregarded the law and brought people from the secret bureau to break into the official residence." Cui Qingming was startled, and some doubt appeared on his face. Qing Shichen actually wanted to impeach Lu Yi. Could it be that he had guessed wrong? However, this wasn't the time to think about these things. He signaled with his eyes, and a few more people stepped forward. "I accuse the Assistant Minister of Justice, Lu Yi." "I second that." For a moment, Lord Lu Yi, who had risen from a small bailiff to the position of Assistant Minister of Justice in the past 2 years, became the target of public criticism. People kept stepping forward to impeach him, but the reasons for the impeachment weren't exactly the same. Behind the crowd, a gaze swept across the people who stepped forward one by one. It swept back and forth a few times before he took out a brush from his sleeve and began to write on the ceremonial tablet. The people stepped forward one by one in an orderly manner. At some point, a white-haired old man stepped forward. "It's Lord Zhao. Even Lord Zhao can't stand the actions of the Secret Intelligence Bureau." Although the old man's official position wasn't prominent, he was known for his knowledge and had many students. Of course, the most important thing was that he was old enough to speak freely in the court. "I accuse the Women's College of misleading the students. They actually spread the fallacy that parents with single eyelids cannot have children with double eyelids. This is completely unsubstantiated." Lord Zhao's words confused all the court officials in the hall. Wasn't everyone criticizing Liu Yi just now? The atmosphere was unprecedentedly high. If they put in more effort, they might be able to pull him down from the position of Assistant Minister of Justice. Had Lord Zhao gone senile? Why did he run out at this time to join in the fun? The court officials didn't care. The ceremonial tablet in the hands of the capital magistrate Liu Dio fell to the ground, and he hurriedly picked it up. Li Xian's mouth was wide open, and his face was full of horror. Li Yi opened his eyes, and he was no longer sleepy. In the main hall, there was no expression on Emperor Jing's face. Below him, the eldest princess, who had always been as still as a mountain, had the beads hanging from the phoenix crown on her head shake. Lord Zhao's interruption was very untimely. It was very likely that he would change the topic and cause His Majesty to overlook Liu Yi's crimes. Some people began to suspect that Lord Zhao, who had always taken a clear stand, had gone senile or had betrayed them. But at the moment, this was not important. Soon, someone stood up and continued the previous topic. He bowed and said, "Your Majesty, in the past 2 years, the Secret Bureau has relied on Your Majesty's favor and has become more and more lawless. If we don't control it, I'm afraid it will be detrimental to the court." Everyone ignored Lord Zhao and brought the topic back. Lord Zhao originally wanted to say something, but after hearing a few whispers from the people beside him, he had no choice but to give up. So many people in the court had stood up one after another. Even the emperor couldn't ignore the opinions of so many people. Emperor Jing stood up from the dragon throne and said, "Since there are so many people impeaching, the Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Justice, Liu Yi, will temporarily suspend the matters at hand. The matter of the Secret Bureau breaking into the official residence will be handed over to the Supreme Court for trial." After dealing with the Secret Bureau case, the court officials didn't have many important things to report. After the eunuch announced the dismissal of the court, Li Yi felt relieved and slowly walked outside with Li Xian. "County Marquis Li, Crown Prince." A eunuch quickly walked over from behind and said, "His Majesty has summoned you. Please move to the Hall of Diligent Government." Chapter 9:16. Outside the Hall of Diligent Government, when they were about to step on the steps, Li Yi said to Li Xian worriedly, "Be careful when you go in." Li Xian nodded solemnly and said, "Don't worry, I know the importance of this matter." Regarding the matter of the Women's College, although old Lord Zhao only said one sentence and the topic was quickly diverted, the officials and the old emperor didn't seem to hear it, but Li Yi always had a bad feeling in his heart. "Greetings, Your Majesty." "Greetings, Uncle Emperor." Inside the Hall of Diligent Government, the old emperor sat on his seat, while Changde and the eldest princess stood on both sides. Emperor Jing looked up at him and asked, "Do you know about the Secret Intelligence Unit?" Li Yi nodded and said, "The Secret Intelligence Unit found that many cases of missing women near the capital were related to the Qin family. Before breaking into the house, they had already confirmed this matter, but they didn't expect that there was a traitor in the secret intelligence unit, who leaked the news in advance and allowed them to transfer the evidence. Emperor Jing looked at Changde, and Changde nodded slightly. Emperor Jing asked again, I heard that Qin Yu of the Qin family raped a woman and fled to avoid punishment. Li nodded again. It's true. Yesterday, the capital magistrate, Lord Liu, led the county government's constables and found the woman in the Qin family's residence. The witness and material evidence are conclusive, but Qin Yu is still missing. If we can find him, we might be able to find a connection between these two cases. It is not good for the secret intelligence unit to intervene in this matter. I leave the Qin family's case to you. Emperor Jing picked up the teacup and moistened his lips, saying, Is 1 month enough? Li Yi cupped his hands and said, I will do my best. The sloppy old man saw with his own eyes that the Qin family's case actually had a result, but it was difficult to show the process in front of everyone. If they still had any actions, they would definitely leave some traces, and things would be much simpler. But if after this matter, they completely stopped and couldn't collect evidence, things would become a little more troublesome. However, this case would come to an end sooner or later, so there was no need to worry too much. It was fortunate that the old emperor didn't seem to notice what the old man had said in court. Above, Emperor Jing took a sip of tea and turned to look at Mingzu. He asked, just now in the imperial court, great scholar Zhao accused the women's college of misleading students and spreading fallacies. Is that true? Li Xian's expression changed and he clenched his fists tightly. Li Yi closed his eyes and opened them again, looking at Mingzu. Mingzhu's expression was calm. After a while, he said, recently, I have been focusing on national affairs and neglected the management of the women's college. Father, please punish me. Emperor Jing waved his hand and said, the affairs of the imperial court were forced upon you by me. How could I care about the women's college and talk about punishment? He then looked at Li Yi and asked, great scholar Zhao said that parents with single eyelids can't have children with double eyelids. Is that true? Your Majesty, great scholar Zhao said. Emperor Jing looked at him and suddenly turned back and said, I am very interested in this matter. Changde, let the Secret Intelligence Office find 100 couples with single eyelids and see whether their children have single eyelids or double eyelids. Li Xian suddenly raised his head, and the shock on his face could no longer be concealed. Above, the eldest princess looked at Li Yi with a complicated expression. Li Yi swallowed the words that he was about to say. He raised his head and looked at Emperor Jing. After a long time, he sighed and said, Your Majesty, there is no need to trouble the Secret Intelligence Office with this matter. There was a dead silence in the hall. After a long time, Mingzu turned to look at Emperor Jing and said worriedly, Father. Emperor Jing's expression was calm. He stretched out his hand and pressed down, saying, Draft an edict to summon the king of Shu back to the capital. Then he waved his hand to the people below, You can leave first. I will leave. I will leave. Ah, what a single eyelid, what a double eyelid. After the door of the hall was closed again, Emperor Jing stood up from his seat and laughed twice. Then he coughed violently and coughed up a mouthful of blood. The three of them walked out of the hall, all looking worried. Li Xian looked back and asked worriedly, What should we do now? The two of them walked silently with their heads down and did not answer. He said anxiously, What time is it? Say something. Li Yi looked back at Mingzu and asked, Are you hungry? Mingzu nodded, Yes. Li Xian was a little annoyed, Hey, what time is it? You are still talking about this. After half an hour, at the meal, he wiped his mouth and rubbed his bulging belly, then said, The Cui family deserved to die, but Uncle Emperor. Li Yi tore a chicken leg and stuffed it into his mouth, and said impatiently, Eat your food. The Cui family would definitely perish, but definitely not in such a manner. He had heard the few violent coughs that came out from the hall, and he believed that Mingzhu had also heard it. Using the Chui family's destruction to exchange for these, was it worth it or not? There was no conclusion. This was just the beginning. The royal family had made such a big scandal. If it was leaked, it would cause a lot of trouble and public opinion among the people. This was something that even the brothels could not control. They still did not know what the impact of the storm would be. Li Xian bit the chicken leg and said, "Uncle Emperor handed that case to you. How are you going to investigate it?" Things had already developed to this point, and it was already out of their control. It was useless to think too much. Li Yi looked at Li Xian, who had already eaten the chicken leg, and asked, "Are you full?" Li Xian rubbed his belly. "I am full." "If you are full, then go home and sleep. Don't think about that nonsense." Compared to the gloomy atmosphere of the meal party, the atmosphere of the Chui family was much more cheerful. This time, Louis Shui will definitely not be kind in the matter of the secret intelligence agency. With so many eyes in the court watching, even if His Majesty wants to play favorites, I'm afraid it will be difficult. If the position of Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Justice falls back into our hands, it will be much more convenient in the future. No matter who gets the position in the end, it is always good for us to get rid of one person. In my opinion, that capital magistrate is also a person who does not know what is good for him. The gloomy expression on the faces of the Chui family members was swept away. After all, this was the only thing that could slightly turn the situation around in recent days. If it was not for Louis Shui, the Chu family would not have fallen, and the Chui family would also have a power that was far more powerful than they were now. The scene of Louis Shui being condemned by thousands of people in the court today still made them feel very happy when they thought about it. At this moment, a man suddenly jogged in from outside. His face was wild with joy. As he ran, he shouted, "Lord Chui, great news, great news." Seeing that the man was almost wild with joy, Cui Qingming was puzzled and asked, "What happened? Why did Lord Su come personally?" The middle-aged man immediately said, "His Majesty has just drafted an edict to summon the King of Shu back to the capital." "What?" Cui Qingming's body trembled. He grabbed the man's arm and said excitedly, "Is this true?" "Absolutely." The man said with certainty, "The edict has already been sent to the 3 provinces. I saw it with my own eyes. Lord Cui, you just need to wait for a few more hours. I'm afraid you will hear the official announcement of the edict." "Good." Cui Qingming's eyes shone brightly. He laughed and said, "Good, it is indeed great news. Today, the Cui residents will hold a banquet to celebrate this matter." Chapter 9:17. In a courtyard of the Xing residence. Xiao Cui rested her chin on her hands and looked in the direction of the stone table in the courtyard. She murmured, "Xiao Zhu, do you think Li won't get tired of eating osmanthus cake like that?" Xiao Zhu rolled her eyes at her and said, "Do you think Li is like you? Fickle and fickle. He used to like it more than anyone else. Now that he has Su Fu Ji's candied plums, he won't touch osmanthus cake anymore." Xiao Cui turned around and glared at her. "That's still better than you always stealing my candied plums." Xiao Zhu didn't continue to pay attention to her. She rested her chin on one hand and whispered, "It's good that he doesn't get tired of it. Just like how Li likes your young mistress. He hasn't gotten tired of it even after so long." After that, she sighed and said, "Li met my young mistress first. At that time, he and Sister Zumo weren't that close, but now," Xiao Cui glanced at her and said mysteriously, "You don't understand this." Xiao Zhu rolled her eyes at her again. "I don't understand." "Do you?" "I don't understand." Xiao Cui looked at her with some disdain and said, "Let me tell you, if it weren't for me, my young mistress and Li wouldn't be so fast." Li Yi sat at the stone table. There was a plate of osmanthus cake on the table. He looked in a certain direction, his eyes unfocused. He reached out to pick up a piece out of habit and put it into his mouth. It was hard to say whether the important officials that he was keeping an eye on would make a move next. The key person in the case had actually disappeared. Chi knew, that little bastard, had no other skills, but he ran pretty fast. Even the Secret Intelligence Bureau couldn't find him. They really underestimated him in the past. Going through Chi knew to solve this case was the simplest and most convenient method. Although it was not direct enough, sometimes being direct often meant trouble. In fact, the most direct method was to give the list to the sloppy old man. Sue's anger had not yet subsided. The wrath of a Grand Master was definitely not something that those who were used to living like princes could withstand. With a complete set of techniques to separate tendons and dislocate bones, not to mention a case, they could even confess all the bad things their ancestors had done for 18 generations. These officials were probably the last trump card of the Chui family. If the case was handled this way, the Chui family would be isolated and helpless in the capital. Moreover, if the Chui family was really related to the case, the Chu family would be their example. The advantage of doing this was that the Chui family had committed such a serious crime. Although they would not be exterminated, they would not be able to escape the confiscation of their properties. Thus, there was no need to use the matter of the King of Shu to deal a fatal blow to the Chui family. The matter of the King of Shu could be handled by the royal family as an internal matter. The problem was, although this method was straightforward, it involved so many nobles and officials at the same time. It would probably cause a huge earthquake in Jingdo. The safety of the nobles could not be guaranteed. It would certainly cause panic among the people and shake the court. Why couldn't there be a method that could satisfy both sides? What a headache, what a headache. Wan Ruoqing walked out of the room and saw that there were only a few pieces of osmanthus cake left on the stone table. She walked into the kitchen and took out another plate to replace the empty one on the table. Li Yi was thinking about something. When he put the thing he touched into his mouth out of habit, he found that something was wrong. Osmanthus cake, it didn't taste like this. He came back to his senses and looked down. He found that he was holding a white and slender hand. What he put into his mouth was not osmanthus cake, but a finger as white as jade. Wan Ruoqing stared at him in a daze. Her mind was blank, so much so that she forgot to pull her finger back. Li Yi put down her hand and looked embarrassed. I'm sorry, I didn't notice just now. No, it's okay. I should have told you. Wan Ruoqing said with a red face and left in a hurry. On the other side, after listening to Xiao Chui's words, Xiao Zhu looked enlightened and murmured, so that's how it is. Xiao Chui said proudly, of course, our young miss is a blockhead. If she had to rely on herself for this kind of thing, I don't know how long she would have to wait. Our young miss is also a blockhead. Xiao Zhu looked thoughtful. After thinking for a while, she asked, didn't you say last time that Li can't hold his liquor well? Speaking of this matter, Xiao Chui smiled and said, how is it not good? He simply can't hold his liquor. Not to mention our young miss, Li can't even hold his liquor as well as I can. Last time, you didn't see him. He only drank 1 cup and he was dizzy. After 3 cups, he was unconscious. After the embarrassing incident just now, Li Yi was not so absorbed in thinking about things. He finally noticed a gaze that looked over from time to time. When Xiao Zhu walked past him for the umpteenth time, Li Yi finally couldn't help but ask, why do you keep looking at me? After eating so many osmanthus cakes, are you thirsty? Drink some grape wine. Xiao Zhu said with a smile and handed over a wine pot. In fact, he was really coughing. Li Yi took the wine pot and poured a cup. After sniffing it, he said in surprise, this is not grape wine, is it? Xiao Zhu picked up the wine pot and sniffed it. It seems that I took the wrong one. It's all wine. It's about the same. Just make do, Li Yi shook his head. I still have important things to do today. I can't drink. He got up and walked into the house. Third Miss Chen was teaching Zui Mo to embroider a wedding dress. A wedding dress was already more than half done and was about to be completed. After sending third Miss Chen out, he didn't see Chin Chong. Li Yi asked casually, "Why didn't I see Lord Chin today?" "He went to the Chui family's banquet." Third Miss Chen looked at him and asked, "I heard that His Majesty summoned the King of Shu back to the capital?" Li Yi nodded and asked again, "Lord Chin went to the banquet to celebrate the return of the King of Shu. From the invitation sent by the Chui family, it should be so." Seeing his strange expression, third Miss Chen asked again, "Is there a problem?" Li Yi dismissed her servants and helped her into the carriage. When he put down the curtain, he said in a low voice, "When the King of Shu returns to the capital this time, many people will die. Probably, it will be among those who attended the banquet today." Seeing that there was no movement in the carriage for a long time, a servant girl walked up and asked in a low voice, "Third Miss, are we going back?" The curtain was lifted a little, and a voice came out, "Go to the Chui residence and tell second master that I have a headache." "Yes." The young maid responded and hurriedly ran forward. Capital Governor's residence. A servant handed over an invitation and asked, "Master, are you really not going to the invitation sent by the Chui family?" Tsing Shichen threw the invitation aside without looking at it and said, "I'm not going. If they ask, just say that I have a headache." Chui residence. Chui Qingming, who was already in charge of all the affairs of the Chui family, stood at the door and personally welcomed the guests. "Lord Qin, please come in, please come in. Lord Han, please go in first. We'll talk later. Elder Zhao, you're here too." The guests were also full of smiles. After presenting their gifts, they cupped their hands in greeting. "I've also heard that the King of Shu is about to return to the capital." "Congratulations, Lord Chui. His Majesty summoned His Highness back to the capital at this time. The meaning is self-evident." "I'll congratulate Lord Chui in advance." Although the news of the King of Shu's return to the capital had not been widely spread, the officials in the capital naturally had channels to know. No matter how they were suppressed in the capital, as long as His Highness was still alive, their hope was still there. Now, their hope had returned. In front of the Chui residence, a carriage stopped. Chui Qingming walked up and greeted with a smile, "Brother Qin." A servant girl ran over, panting, and whispered a few words in Chen Chong's ear. Chen Chong's expression changed, and he asked, "What did you say?" "Third Miss is sick." Chui Qingming was startled. He took another step forward and said, "Brother Qin, please." Chen Chong turned around and jumped back into the carriage, urging, "Hurry back to the residence." Chui Qingming stood where he was, watching the carriage leave in a daze. "Please come in." The two words had just left his mouth when they dissipated in the wind. Chapter 9:18. The Chui family, which had been quiet for a long time, finally became lively again on the first day of the 6th month. Compared to the glory of the Chui family 2 years ago, the lively scene today was somewhat lacking. However, the desolation was only temporary. The announcement of the edict allowed everyone to see the dawn of hope. In the main hall of the Chui family, everyone toasted each other. The host and guests were happy and full of smiles. As they chatted, someone looked around, put down his wine cup, and said in surprise, "Why don't I see Lord Qin and Lord Tseng?" Chui Qingming smiled and said, "Lord Tseng is not feeling well, and Lord Qin has some urgent matters to attend to, so they can't come today." "What urgent matter can be more important than this?" "Recently, Lord Qin seems to be a bit abnormal." "It's not just Lord Qin, I feel that Lord Tseng is even more abnormal." Today, the two of them, Chui Qingming raised his hand and pressed it down. He smiled and said, "The two lords are my colleagues, so they must have some difficult matters. Let's ignore them for now." Everyone, please drink to your heart's content today. Although Cui Qingming said this, the smile on his face was somewhat forced. There was a trace of darkness hidden in his eyes that no one noticed. Lord Qin, is there any news from nephew Qin? Cui Qingming did not want to talk about this matter anymore, so someone changed the topic at the right time. A trace of anger appeared on Qin Yan's face. He said, "This unfilial son, I don't know where he went. He didn't even bring a message to the family. Lord Qin, everyone here is on the same side. You don't need to hide. Yes, this is not a serious case. There is no need for nephew to hide. This will make things more complicated." Qin Yan's face revealed a complicated expression. "I won't hide it from everyone. This official really doesn't know where that unfilial son went. Everyone is well aware of this matter." Lord Qin is wrong. Qin Yan shook his head and no longer argued. He turned to look at Cui Qingming and said, "His Majesty gave that case to Li Yi. I worry." Cui Qingming raised his wine cup and smiled unconcernedly. He said, "So what if it was given to him? Not to mention that we have already taken care of this case. Even if he finds it, what can he do?" A month's time was not short, but it was not long either. However, it was not enough to investigate a case that could not be found through proper channels. Li Yi did not think that he was better than Master Bao. In fact, in terms of normal investigation, he was not as good as Louis Shui. On the surface, Louis Shui was being investigated by the Supreme Court, but he was secretly collecting evidence. Li Yi had nothing to do. In the past half a month, all he did was teach Mississippi Lu to read, play with the Tsundra Lolita and Yong Ning, accompany Rui, and sleep with the little fellow, and often visit Ruoqing's place. That was all. During this period of time, the case was still pending, and Su had a lot of opinions about him. He had an eccentric temperament and rarely cared about anything, but if he cared about something, it would not be easy for him to let it go. 10 days, 10 more days. Before he left, Li promised him again and again that if there was no result within 10 days, he would use his own method to solve this matter. In the morning dew hall, the eldest princess, who had just left the court, had not yet had time to change out of her court clothes. She looked at Li Yi, and after a moment, said slowly, "Don't investigate the case that father asked you to investigate anymore." Li Yi did not speak, but just looked at her quietly, waiting for her explanation. Louis Shui has been secretly investigating this case for more than half a month. Mingzu poured a cup of tea for him, sat down and said, "The Cui family, the Qin family, and nearly 1/3 of the dignitaries in the capital are involved. The Cui family has done so many things, and the reason why they are still fearless is that once something happens to the Cui family, these people will all be involved. There are too many people involved in this case. This is an extremely powerful force. Once they fight back, it will cause great turmoil, affecting the entire capital and even the country." Li Yi took a sip of tea and said, "Then don't give them a chance to fight back." Mingzi shook her head and said, "That's impossible. As long as you take action against one family, the others will immediately unite. You alone, even with me, can't resist them." She looked out of the window and said tiredly, "The capital has been rotten from the root. It doesn't matter if the root is rotten, as long as the rotten root is dug out, you can't give up." Li Yi smiled, said nothing more, turned around and left. Mingzi quickly walked out of the door and said, "We will think of a way to deal with this matter. Don't act rashly." Li Yi waved his hand and said, "I know." When he walked out of the palace gate and was about to get on the carriage, a voice with a smile came from behind. "Isn't this the famous County Marquis Li?" A middle-aged man came out of the palace and asked with a smile, "I heard that His Majesty gave a serious case to County Marquis Li with a deadline of 1 month. Now that the deadline is almost here, I wonder how County Marquis Li's investigation is going." Li Yi turned around, looked at the current master of the Cui family, and said with a smile, "Soon, Your Excellency Cui, I'm afraid you have to prepare early." Cui Qingming sneered and said, "You investigate your case, what do I need to prepare?" When Li Yi got on the carriage and put down the curtain, he reminded Cui Qingming, "Your Excellency Cui, when you take a bath next time, you might as well wash your neck more, it's better to wash it clean." Cui Qingming was stunned, and didn't come to himself until the carriage went far away. He touched his neck and asked, what did he mean? The servant behind him shook his head. Cui Qingming watched the carriage disappear completely, and his face darkened. He said coldly, "You don't know what's good for you. I want to see how long you can be so arrogant." The Qin family. Qin Yan looked at the drunk fifth master of the Qin family who walked in from outside, and his already gloomy face became even more unsightly. He said angrily, "Look at you, all you do is drink. Do you know how the people outside talk about you, how they talk about our Qin family?" Qin he raised his head to look at him and asked, "Isn't this good?" The anger on Qin Yan's face grew even stronger. "Don't you know what you were like in the past, and what you are like now?" Qin he sighed, raised his head to look at Qin Yan, and asked, "If I were to become like I was in the past, the one that should be worried should be Big Brother, right?" "You?" Qin Yan was stunned as he looked at Qin He's disappearing figure, and after a short moment, his expression changed indeterminately. Although he couldn't help but want to reprimand Qin He every time he saw Qin He's useless appearance, he felt in his heart that Qin He's current appearance was much, much better than before. At least, Qin He wouldn't feel the danger of the entire Qin family being out of his control. After a short moment, he suppressed these thoughts in his heart, turned his head to look, and muttered, "It's been almost a month. Where did this unfilial son go? It's been almost a month." In another courtyard of the Qin family, the fifth master of the Qin family washed his face, and the drunkenness on his face disappeared. Wu Er stood at the side, and with a handkerchief on the ground, he asked curiously, "Fifth master, what's almost a month?" "The deadline for County Marquis Li's investigation is almost here." The fifth master of the Qin family took the handkerchief, wiped his face, and threw it to the side. He looked at Wu Er and said, "There's almost no time, take me to see County Marquis Li." Chapter 919. Imperial Father spends most of his time sleeping now. Imperial Mother won't even let me talk to Imperial Father. The proud Lolita propped up her chin with one hand and sat opposite Li Yi. Bored, she picked up the chess pieces on the chessboard and muttered, "I wanted to play chess with Imperial Father today. If I deliberately lost a few games to him, perhaps Imperial Father would be happy." Li Yi rubbed her head and said, "You know how to let go. Our Shaning has also grown up now." In the past, when Li Yi rubbed her head like this, she would always squint her eyes, smile, and reveal the dimples at the corners of her mouth, like a lazy cat. She didn't know when it started, but she started to resist this action. "In that game just now, I also let Sir win a few times. Otherwise, I would have won a long time ago." She puffed out her chest and said with some pride, "Moreover, I didn't just grow up. I've grown up a long time ago. I'll be 15 soon." A 15-year-old proud Lolita could no longer be called a little girl. When Li Yi looked carefully, he found that the trace of baby fat on her face was now completely gone. She looked at Li Yi with joy, shook his arm and said, "Sir, now that I've grown up, can I drink the same soup as Imperial Sister?" Li Yi was startled. He lowered his head to look at her and asked, "Why do you want to drink that kind of soup?" "Nothing much. If Imperial Sister can drink it, then I can drink it too." She lowered her head and looked at her toes. She said with a red face, "Moreover, I've already asked the nannies in the palace. Making soup for Xiao Huan and Rui was out of consideration for family. Giving soup to the eldest princess was out of concern for a friend. To let a proud Lolita drink soup, then he was a beast with evil intentions." Before he could think of a reason to fool her, the servants of the Li family came to report that a guest had come to visit. This was truly an unexpected guest. Qin He stepped into the hall and bowed. "Greetings, Lord Li." Wu Er lowered his head and walked over from behind. He silently stood behind Li Yi. Li Yi stretched out his hand and said, "Sit." After Qin He sat down, he looked at the girl who had an extraordinary temperament and was playing with the chessboard in boredom. Li Yi introduced, "This is Princess Xiaoning." Qin He, who had already sat down, suddenly stood up and said respectfully, "This commoner greets your highness." "Don't stand on ceremony, don't stand on ceremony." The proud Lolita waved her hand. She didn't like these people who had to bow endlessly when they saw her. She was still waiting for this person to leave so that she could talk to the mister about drinking the soup. Li Yi picked up his teacup and gestured to Qin He, asking, "May I know why 5th Master Qin is here today?" "Qin He is not worthy of Lord Li's title of 5th Master." After Qin Wuye sat down, he shook his head and said, "Lord Li, you've been investigating the Qin family's case these days. I wonder if you found anything." Li Yi put down his teacup, looked at him in surprise, and asked, "5th Master, do you think it's appropriate for you to ask this question?" "Lord Li is wise. If the Qin family has really done something dirty, I don't think they can hide it from you." Qin He shook his head and said, "It's just that sometimes, in addition to the result, the process is equally important." 5th Master Qin took out a thick book from his sleeve, put it on the table, and said, "The Qin family is attached to the Cui family and the King of Shu. All these years, they have done a lot of things behind my father's back, all of which are in this book." After he sat back down, he said, "The missing women's case that Lord Li is investigating involves not only the Qin family. This case has always been secretly planned by my good-for-nothing nephew. Unfortunately, although he is good for nothing, he is a rare tough nut to crack. Please forgive me for being powerless." Li Yi's gaze lingered on him for a long time before he asked, "Is Qin Yu still alive?" Qin He nodded. "Yes." Li Yi took a sip of tea, then gave him a thumbs up and praised, "5th Master Qin, you really have a good way." Qin He just modestly cupped his hands. "In terms of means, I am far inferior to you, Lord Li." The two of them complimented each other face to face, which seemed a little shameless. Li Yi looked at him and asked, "You came today to deliver this?" Qin He shook his head and said, "I also wanted to remind you, Lord Li, that this case involves a lot of people. Once it is investigated in depth, I'm afraid it will affect half of the capital. It's best to be careful." Li Yi looked distressed. "Then what should I do? I definitely can't fight half of the capital. How about we stop investigating and go to His Majesty to receive punishment?" Qin He lowered his head, then quickly raised it again. Looking at the chessboard beside him, he said, "Press the strong and not the weak. Take away a few of their most important chess pieces, and they will also lose the game." Li Yi nodded, looked at him, and asked, "5th Master, do you also play chess?" This turn could not be said to be small. Qin He came back to his senses and nodded. "I know a little." Among the people she found who could play against her, the arrogant Lolita had no opponents. Li Yi handed the black chess pieces to Qin He, then looked at the arrogant Lolita and said, "If you beat him, you can drink as much soup as you want." The arrogant Lolita's eyes lit up, and she asked excitedly, "Really?" Li Yi nodded. "When has Master ever lied to you?" "Pinky swear." After confirming with Li Yi, the arrogant Lolita looked at Qin He and urged, "What are you still standing there for? Come over and play chess." Qin He lowered his head and said, "What kind of status do I have? How could I dare to play chess with the princess?" The arrogant Lolita put her hands on her hips like a little hen and pretended to be fierce. "I tell you to play, so play. This is an order." Qin He glanced at Li Yi and had no choice but to sit over. After a dozen moves, the arrogant Lolita wrinkled her pretty nose and said with dissatisfaction, "Even if I want to win, I want to win fair and square. I don't need you to go easy on me. If you go easy on me again, I will ask Father Emperor to beat you. Qin He's face was expressionless, but a trace of surprise appeared in his eyes. He nodded and said, "This commoner obeys." Although Li Yi had also investigated this fifth master of the Qin family, he only knew that he was good at chess from a seemingly unintentional sentence from Prince Ning. The arrogant Lolita did not lack talent. What she lacked was the accumulation of time and experience. In terms of chess skills, she was still a distance away from these old foxes. Not long after, her delicate eyebrows furrowed tightly. Qin He put down a chess piece and stood up. He cupped his hands and said, "Your Highness, thank you for going easy on me." The arrogant Lolita's little face showed a look of distress. If she lost, she would not be able to drink the soup that Master personally brewed. She glared at the person opposite her. This man was really hateful. She was still a child. Did he not know to go easy on her? What are you so proud of? She curled her lips and removed the black chess pieces at several key positions on the chessboard. She put down her white chess pieces and said proudly, "Now I've won." Qin He opened his mouth. The arrogant Lolita immediately said, "Don't speak. If you speak again, I'll have Imperial Father beat you." Li Yi looked at Qin He and said with a smile, "Sorry, this is how our family plays chess." The arrogant Lolita was overjoyed because Master had just said, "our family." Qin He looked at the chessboard, then looked at Li Yi. He seemed to have understood something. A smile also appeared on his face. He took back the booklet on the table and bowed, saying, "I've lost. Your Highness, Lord Li, I will take my leave." "Master, I've won." The arrogant Lolita turned to look at him and made a gesture of victory. In the kitchen, Li Yi helped the arrogant Lolita boil soup. He conveniently took a chicken leg and handed it to the sloppy old man standing outside the door with a bitter expression. The sloppy old man glanced at him. "I have no appetite." Forget it, forget it. That thing. I'll give it to you." Li Yi took out a booklet and handed it to him. He said, "If you don't have enough people, you can go to the Luo Alliance to find Lu Luo. They shouldn't refuse Su's request." After the sloppy old man took the booklet, he flipped through it and turned to leave. After a few steps, he turned back and snatched the chicken leg from Li Yi's hand. The next moment, his figure suddenly disappeared. Chapter 920. This world was different from the future. After being here for a few years, Li Yi gradually understood some principles. For some people, if you tried to reason with them, they would act like a hooligan. If you tried to reason with them, they would act like a hooligan. If you tried to reason with them, they would act like a hooligan. If you tried to reason with them, they would be even more of a hooligan than you. To deal with this kind of hooligan, there was no need to talk about reason or the law. Directly flipping the table was the best choice. It was like playing chess with a tsundere. It didn't matter who won or who had the advantage. As long as she used her ultimate killing move, the universe's invincible howling celestial dog, or the contestants turned into the referee and declared that they would win, the game would be over. Similarly, influenced by the tsundere, Li Yi didn't want to continue playing with the Cui family. It was better to directly flip the table. With an old hooligan like Su around, who would be more of a hooligan? "Sir, is the soup ready?" The tsundere sat in the courtyard, anxiously waiting. Li Yi collected his thoughts and opened the lid of the clay pot. He picked up a spoon and tasted it. He turned around and said, it's ready, Lu Mang." Dozens of people respectfully stood in an open space. They looked at a sloppy old man in front of them. Their faces were filled with excitement. They bowed and said, "We will follow Senior's orders." The sloppy old man turned his head and signaled. Someone had already handed them a piece of paper. His face darkened and he said coldly, "Look carefully. Tonight, you will see these names. Don't leave out a single one." "Understood." Everyone bowed and their voices resounded throughout the drill ground. Qin Manor. The servants of the Qin clan watched as a drunk figure walked into the mansion. They glanced at him and then looked away. They were already used to Fifth Lord's behavior. But the strange thing was that he usually had a man supporting him. Today, he came back alone. Qin Yan walked out of the hall. He found it hard to calm the melancholy in his heart. Qin Yu had already disappeared for almost a month. In this month, not a single piece of news had been sent back. Within the capital, he had asked everyone he could think of, but there was still no news at all. At this point, he finally had a bad premonition in his heart. This wasn't like the unfilial son's personality, and it didn't make sense. It was as if he had completely disappeared from this world. Not only could the Qin family not find him, but even the government and the secret intelligence agency couldn't find him. Although he didn't know his son that well, he knew very well that he didn't have the ability to hide so well that even the Secret Service couldn't find him. He was already depressed, and when he saw the drunken figure walking over, he was naturally even more annoyed. "You went to drink again. Look at you now, you don't look like a human at all." The fifth lord of the Qin family raised his head, looked at him solemnly, and said, "Brother, I actually don't like it when you say that about me." Qin Yan's eyes widened. This was the first time in recent years that he had seen his fifth brother talk back to him. He pointed at him and said in disbelief, "Look in the mirror, look at yourself. I'm doing this for the sake of the Qin family's face. You still dare to talk back. Face." Fifth Lord Qin laughed mockingly, and said, "Don't deceive yourself and others. What face does the Qin family have left? The Qin family's face was not lost by me, but by you people." Qin Yan's face revealed anger, pointed at him, and said, "How much did you drink tonight? Bastard, you dare to say such words, do you still have any manners?" Qin he looked at him seriously, shook his head, and said, "Rules. Don't be naive, rules are meant to be broken. If worse comes to worst, I'll just flip the table and not play anymore," he muttered, and then said, "Also, I don't like it when you call me, bastard." Bang! Qin Yan's body flew back into the room, knocking over several tables and chairs. Qin he rubbed his forehead, and muttered, "I'm really a bit drunk, I can't even control my hands and feet. Wu Er, why aren't you helping Fifth Lord?" Wu Er, after saying these two sentences, he nodded in understanding. "Oh, Wu Er is gone, he's coming. A sturdy figure ran over from behind, and supported his swaying body. He looked at the Qin family servants at the side, and said angrily, "Are all of you dead people? What are you still standing there for? Why aren't you going to help the great lord?" The capital was the richest place in the Jing kingdom, and it was also the place where the nobles and officials gathered the most. In the same city, there were poor commoners who didn't know the next meal, and were worried about their livelihood. There were also high officials who were fish in the day, and had fun at night. The two regions, one in the north and one in the south, were like two completely different worlds. In the southern district of the capital, in a luxurious mansion, the naked middle-aged fatty had just climbed down from the body of the seventh concubine he married a few days ago. He wiped the sweat from his forehead, and inadvertently glanced at him. The sweat that he had just wiped off came out again. But this time, it was cold sweat. His body trembled a few times, and he looked at the cloaked figure sitting at the table in the middle of the hall, and said with a trembling voice, You, who are you? Is it over?" A surprised voice came from under the cloak. "That's a bit fast, your kidneys aren't working, right?" As the voice fell, two figures slowly walked over. One of the figures glanced at the naked woman on the bed a few times. The other person beside him coughed lightly. Watch your discipline. That person immediately retracted his gaze, and with a flick of his toes, the quilt that had fallen to the ground flew up to the bed, and covered the woman's body. The woman had long been scared pale, but the middle-aged fatty pretended to be calm. He pointed at the two people and asked, "You, who are you? What do you want? Do you know who I am?" One of them waved his hand and said, "Han De Yuen, you've committed a crime. Come with us." Han De Yuen. The middle-aged fatty was stunned, and said, I'm not Han De Yuen, what? That person was stunned, and he asked, "Isn't this the Han residence?" The middle-aged fatty said timidly, "This is the Han residence, but the Han De Yuen you're talking about lives in the Han residence next door." Between the two of them, one of them took out a portrait, and after looking at it carefully, he cursed in a low voice, "Damn it, we've gone the wrong way." He glared at the person beside him, and then looked at the middle-aged fatty, and said, "I'm sorry, I've mistaken you for someone else. Sorry for disturbing you. You can continue." The two of them walked out of the door, and when they closed the door, one of them turned back and whispered, "Eat more chives on a daily basis, it's good, Claw Thorn." Before the middle-aged fatty could finish his sentence, he felt a sharp pain in his neck, and his entire body went limp and fell onto the bed. The woman wanted to open her mouth to scream, but her vision also went black, and she lost consciousness. Not long after, in the house next door, a middle-aged man curled up at the foot of the bed, and looked at the two people in the room in horror. He said with a trembling voice, "You, who are you? What are you doing here?" A black shadow in the room asked in a deep voice, "Are you Han Sanyuan?" The middle-aged man felt relieved, and he shook his head and said, No, you've got the wrong person. I'm Han De Yuen, that's right." A person walked forward and tapped his neck lightly. The middle-aged man was horrified to find that his body could no longer move. The figure hidden in the cloak said coldly, "Han De Yuen, you've committed a crime. Come with us." Chapter 9:21. The weather is dry. Be careful of the fire. Guard against thieves and burglars. Close the doors and windows. It's the third watch. It was a dark and windy night. It was a day of murder and arson. The clouds were thick and the stars were hidden, covering the moon. The entire capital was shrouded in a thick layer of darkness. The next day would certainly not be a sunny day, but for some people, tonight was a rare opportunity. In the third watch, in the capital, regardless of whether it was the commoners or the nobles, they had all put out their lights and gone to sleep. The night watchman struck the gong and slowly walked through the streets. From time to time, a group of patrolling soldiers would hurriedly pass by. Their armor and weapons clashed, creating clanging sounds. However, neither the night watchman nor the soldiers noticed that above their heads, countless ghostly figures were swiftly passing by. In a noble manner. In the quiet manner, a few barks suddenly came from a dog. A guard opened his sleepy eyes and mumbled, "It's the middle of the night. What are you barking for? Tomorrow, we'll kill you and make stew." Although he said this, he still got up and opened the door, intending to go over and take a look. In the courtyard, in the darkness of the night, a black figure looked indifferently at the vicious dog opposite him. The vicious dog immediately stopped barking and ran back to its kennel with its tail between its legs. The guard, whose hand was already on the door latch, narrowed his eyes and listened. He then shook his head and sleepily returned to his room. In a room in the courtyard, another figure completely shrouded in a cloak patted the face of a man who was sleeping soundly on the bed. "Wake up!" The man opened his eyes. His face was filled with panic and fear. Then, his acupuncture points were sealed. He could not move or speak. His entire body was put into a large bag. The figure carried the bag and walked into the courtyard. With a light leap, he leaped onto the courtyard wall. The figure in the courtyard glanced at the kennel and quickly retreated. In the darkness of the night, there was more than one figure carrying a large bag hurriedly. Everyone rushed over from all directions. Finally, they all gathered in the same courtyard. The unkempt old man swept his gaze over them and said, "Count, count. Is everyone here?" A person counted and respectfully said, "There should be 40 people, but there are 38. There are 2 more people on the way. Senior, please give us your instructions." "They're here." As soon as the voice fell, 2 large bags were thrown in from outside. The sloppy old man walked back into the hall, pulled out a chicken leg, took a bite, and said, "You should be responsible for your own people." There were quite a few rooms in the courtyard. Everyone split into groups of 2, picked up the squirming bags in the courtyard, and picked a room to enter. In a certain room, the man sitting in front of the table looked at the figure kneeling before him and asked in a deep voice, "Name?" "You, who are you people?" In the hall, the man who was only wearing an inner shirt had a look of horror on his face. "Why did you bring me here?" The man asked again, "Name?" "You, do you know who I am? If you capture me, don't even think about escaping the capital." Behind him, a man kicked him impatiently. "I'm asking you a question. Come back here and don't play any tricks." Although the man kneeling there was terrified, the situation was beyond his control. In order not to provoke these villains, he could only answer honestly, "Wei Qi." Official position: Ministry of Works. Assistant Minister of the Ministry of Works. The man glanced at him and said, "What bad things have you done? Tell me." The man called Wei Qi looked up, then lowered his head and said, "I don't know what you're talking about. Leniency for those who confess, and severity for those who resist." The man in the cloak reminded him, for example, the dirty things you've done with the Qin family and the Cui family. "Tell me everything." Wei Qi's body trembled. He raised his head and said helplessly, "Why did you capture me? I really don't know what you're talking about." The man in the cloak turned his gaze to another person and said, "Don't waste time. Do it. You want to." "Ah." The man named Wei Qi had not even finished his sentence when he fell to the ground. Blue veins were bulging on his exposed skin. His forehead was dripping with cold sweat. His body was twitching uncontrollably. It was obvious that he was in extreme pain. The man squatted down and asked, "Are you going to tell me?" I don't know. I don't know what to say." The man didn't ask any more questions. Instead, he reached out and touched a certain spot on Wei Qi's body again. This time, the blue veins under his skin began to throb like wriggling earthworms. It was extremely terrifying. At the same time to time, he let out a low roar of extreme pain. Tears and mucus flowed down his face. Without waiting for the man to ask any questions, he immediately said, I'll tell you everything." The man reached out and touched Wei Qi's body twice. Wei Qi's clothes were already soaked. He lay on the ground, gasping for breath, as if he had just been fished out of the water. The man shook his head and threw a pen and paper in front of him. "Why didn't you cooperate earlier? Be honest and don't try to fool us. We all know your background. If you dare to write a lie, I'll let you have a taste of what you just experienced." Wei Qi quickly turned over, grabbed the pen, and quickly wrote on the paper. If he confessed, he might lose his official hat and die. But if he didn't, he would feel worse than death. Even if he died, he didn't want to experience that kind of torture again, in another room. "You don't want to talk, do you?" The masked man stood up and looked at the figure kneeling in the room. After taking 2 steps, he said to another person, "Do it." The man was stunned and asked, "Do what?" The masked man said, "Let him have a taste of the separating tendons and dislocating bones hand." The man looked at him and murmured, "The separating tendons and dislocating bones hand. I don't know how to do it." The masked man was also stunned. "Then what do you know?" The man shook his head and said, "I practice proper martial arts, not this kind of method." The masked man sat down again and said, "I don't care. I was the one who caught him, so you can interrogate him. If you can't interrogate him, my points won't be deducted." "You." That person glared at him, but he also felt somewhat helpless. He lowered his head to look at the man kneeling on the ground with a face full of panic and praised, "This person is not a good person, but he looks rather handsome." He looked up at the masked man and said, "Step aside." After saying that, he began to take off his pants. The man kneeling on the ground changed his expression and said in a trembling voice, What are you doing? Don't, let me go. I'll tell you everything." The man shook his head with some regret and put on his pants. Looking at the masked man, he said, "The interrogation is finished. In the other rooms. We will not wrongly accuse any good person, and we will not let any bad person go. You have the right to remain silent, and I also have the right to beat you until you don't." A few months ago, the case of Lady Shuang of the wonderful Sound Pavilion had caused an uproar in Jingdo. Everyone knew about it. Later on, her unjust case was redressed. In order to commemorate her, warn the Yamen, and comfort the people, the court reformed the law and built an ancestral hall for her in Jingdo. In order to thank Lady Shuang for her contributions, people did not hesitate to travel from distant places to pay their respects. As a result, the incense and offerings in Lady Shuang's ancestral hall never stopped. Every morning, before the ancestral hall opened, countless people would line up in front of the door, waiting for the manager to open the hall. Today was also a normal morning. A Yamen runner yawned. After opening the main door of the ancestral hall, he did not go in to take a look. He walked away in a daze. His daily duty was to open and close the door. It was still early, so it was best to go back and have a good night's sleep. Everyone lined up and walked in, holding incense and offerings in their hands. The moment they stepped into the courtyard, they saw a scene that they did not expect. According to tradition, before entering the ancestral hall, they had to first pay their respects in front of the stone tablet in the courtyard. At this moment, figures were tightly bound with ropes. They were kneeling motionlessly in front of the stone tablet. In front of each of them was a piece of paper that was pressed down by a stone. The paper was densely packed with small words. It was too far to see clearly. Everyone stopped in their tracks. Their faces were filled with shock. They did not dare to go forward. Taking advantage of the time when someone reported to the Yamen, some busybodies counted the number of people kneeling on the ground. There were exactly 40 people. Finally, someone could not resist his curiosity and took a few tentative steps forward. Soon, a number of people followed. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.